the place. I don't know why I'm very pale today. The lighting in this room is crap. I think.
Yeah, I was just going to say everything is just kind of blown out. Like it's just mad. You know what I mean?
Just a minute. Let me just let me experiment with something. 1 second.
No problem.
Okay, that is a bit dramatic, and that made almost no difference. I now look like I'm a sex offender on the dark web, so I won't do that. What I'm going to do is. What I'll do is I will appear for the first few seconds, and then I will switch the camera off, thereby so people can see that I'm actually a person.
Yeah, okay. So we are live.
Hello, everybody in YouTube land.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? Cider Report back for a video. Joining me is Kendon Farr, slowly becoming friend of the channel.
Yep. Yes, so, I am. For those who don't know, I was famous on TikTok. I am famous on TikTok with about 562,000 subscribers. But as we've already established in previous videos, TikTok famous is the worst
it's the worst famous.
It doesn't get me into clubs. I can't pass the velvet rope. Now, because the picture quality on my camera has decided to be terrible today, I'm going to switch the camera off, but obviously keep the microphone live. And Stephen and I are just going to chat about bits and pieces. And so what I'm going to do is press the magic button and whoop, I disappear. Right, Stephen, crack on.
Yeah.
Sir.
Yeah, so we have some, we've a wide variety of topics tonight, as you can kind of see by the title. So look, we'll kind of start in like most recent news, which was it only yesterday that Prince Philip died?
Yes.
Was that only yesterday? Yeah, yesterday. So yeah, I suppose, Kendon, like you as a Brit, we'll kind of get your kind of opinion on it, or because like the royal family, to the best of my knowledge, is like pretty well respected and stuff like that still in Britain. Like it's like they're up there, and any sort of like a dissenting opinion is kind of still very frowned upon. So I guess we'll just kind of go from there.
Well, I suppose the only way to understand the death of Prince Philip is to understand the relevance and the poignancy that we hold the royal family. Even people who are not really royalists still respect Queen Elizabeth II in some strange way as a cultural figurehead, as an icon. Because the British have no appetite for extremism, fascism and communism have never taken root in our country. We have fascists, we have communists, but they've never gained enough ground to really sway governments. At least, it depends on who you talk to, of course. But the Queen embodies a royal family line that goes back 1,000 years and represents stability and tradition and custom. And Prince Philip, while as the Queen's consort, was part of that image. Also, given his age and his military record, he was part of what I believe the Americans call the Golden Generation. So he was the one who, along with his friends, fought off aggressors during the Second World War. And so with his death goes a little piece of British history. And that's what people... that's why people mourn. That's why British people mourn, because in Phil the Greek, the Duke of Edinburgh, we saw a part of ourselves, a part of our history, which is now gone. I mean, let's face it, 99 is a bloody good run. So no one was surprised by this death. Also, I think he was stricken with COVID earlier and a few months ago, and I think that's what's hastened his departure. But yeah, that's why people are mourning. I mean, when his wife goes, when Queen Elizabeth II dies, the country will descend into national mourning, because it will change everything. It will change how the British see themselves. So that's why Prince Philip's death has had such an impact, even though he wasn't obviously directly in charge of the place.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I kind of wanted, so I had obviously already reached out to you, and then Dave from Math Pig Circle is English as well, and I had asked him to join as well, but he was busy. He was doing something else, so that's kind of fair enough. Because I did want a British person to kind of talk about it, because my own personal view about it is just going to be straight up and not sugarcoat, the same as I do with basically everything. I cannot mathematically work out to you how little I give a fuck. I just don't care. It
Well, of
just,
course you don't.
I'm sorry. Like, obviously, I'm not happy that he's dead. He wasn't like a terrible person. There was some questionable stuff, but that's, it doesn't lead to the kind of,
No,
celebratory sort of thing. So
no.
like, yeah, I'm not
No,
happy
of
that
course,
the man is dead.
but no one is expecting you. I mean, but he was an Irishman, especially. No one's expecting
Mm,
you to, mourn the passing of the British Queen's consort. No one expects that at all. But
mm.
it does annoy me when British TikTokers and YouTubers claim that it doesn't matter that he's dead, and it's like, well, yes, but that's because you don't understand the relevance in the first place. That's the bit that annoys me. It's like, don't get me wrong, I didn't know the man, I didn't owe him anything personally
Mm,
necessarily, but
mm.
he did embody things, and that matters to the culture. So there we are.
Yeah. So, look, I'm not in a state of mourning. I'm not, or anything else like that. I did run into a little bit of this is just a slight tangent, and unless you have anything else then to kind of add, then afterwards we'll just kind of move on from this, because again, I just don't have that much to say about it. But I couldn't, rightfully kind of do a stream with this, big old news and not at least mention it. I did get into like let's just say a little bit of trouble yesterday, because I tweeted about the fact that Prince Philip had died, and I made a slight. So in the tweet that I put out, that like kind of announced sort of that he was dead, I put a joke in there, and people were kind of saying, that like it was too soon, this and that, the other thing, which I can look, okay, I can kind of understand that argument, because I did tweet out 14 minutes after the Google alert went off on my phone that he had died. So, I can understand that it was like definitely too soon. What I actually said was, wait, and I actually see if I can directly, because I have some Twitter stuff to talk about, or some Twitter videos to kind of reference. So, okay, so I tweeted out, I guess the decaying corpse that Prince Philip was carrying around finally gave out. That's the tweet that I put out. And yeah, it did not go down very well. But
No, I can't imagine it would have done. But no, I mean, this is it. I mean, the trouble is that this is the mistake that the royals made when Princess Diana died. People assumed that it was assumed by the royal household that Lady Diana Spencer, because she wasn't Princess Di when she died, because she divorced Charles by that point. Lady Diana Spencer, when she died, that the British may go into quiet mourning, that she was the heir to the throne's ex-wife, and that it didn't really matter all that much. They underestimated the romantic attachment that the British people have to the royal family, even if they wouldn't admit it. And it's not a rational attachment, let's be honest. Her Majesty the Queen is just a nice old lady in a fancy hat, after all, who lives in a very ugly house. Buckingham Palace is not an attractive building. But because they embody so much, we pour our national values into them, which is not fair. They become vessels for however we see our country. So yeah, I imagine there was some sort of backlash. Although, to be fair, at the age of 99, he was not in his physical prime, and he did look somewhat decrepit. I have to concede that point.
So yeah, so look, I mean, so I had done something about Prince Philip before. I genuinely no recollection of where it actually came out, but I did use this picture, and like, I'm going to do the same as I did then. I kind of want to give a little bit of a trigger warning, because it just does not. So I'm sorry, he looks like a ghoul. Like, he looks like he's dead there. You know what I mean?
He does look like a cast member of
Like,
Vampire the Masquerade. Let's be honest.
yeah,
I would put him in Clan Nosferatu. But the trouble, I mean, he's 99. You will not look anything like a human being at the age of 99. It's an unnatural lifespan, realistically, even with our modern medical technology. So, I mean, I'm surprised he was awake. But there we go. As I say, there's no, you don't, it's not that you need to apologize for it necessarily. That's not where I'm coming from. But you must understand that I think for a lot of people, people who aren't even passionate royalists, Prince Philip did represent something greater than all of us, which isn't fair because Prince Philip was just a bloke, ultimately, a bloke with, you know, a very privileged life. But there's a sense of duty. One of the things I enjoy and admire about the royal family in the UK is they actually believe in a sense of duty. They're not just posers on Instagram, flashing their jewelry, living in big castles. I mean, could you imagine, you know, Kim Kardashian as the on the throne? It would be a nightmare. The sort of like a celebrity scandal. They believe in quiet observation of duties, which Kim Kardashian and other creatures, modern celebrities, don't. So, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't worry about it, to be honest. I mean, people will get over it. They'll get over it, and it'll be fine.
Yeah, no, because I mean, like, I did kind of like rightfully so, kind of like talk about, or like, I had referenced, or I had already said, you know, look, I get that it was like you know, was a joke about somebody that had just died. Like, I knew that I was going to get some backlash, like the type of backlash. Okay, so basically, why I kind of bring it up is because somebody who already follows me, tweeted and said that like I was an utter piece of human garbage, and how dare I call myself a humanist because I made a joke about somebody that had just died. And I'm like, okay, so first off,
yeah,
like, I'm pretty sure that the guy was not even British, so I mean, why he was so kind of upset about it, like, you know, it was, but like, you can make a joke about somebody that is, and this is not even just about him. This is about like anybody. You can make a joke about somebody that has died and still be a humanist. I mean, what I called him out for beautifully on Twitter, if I do say so myself, is he had not a single word to say, nor a little bit of pushback at all when I tweeted out about how genuinely happy I was to hear that Rush Limbaugh had died. And he joined in on that celebration of his death, but how dare I talk? So it was a little bit double standard, a little bit whatever. But look, we're not going to get into Twitter drama because, I just,
as you know, I have a deep pathological aversion to Twitter and refuse to use the platform. So I understand that, you know, as Ricky Gervais memorably put it, Twitter is every toilet wall in history combined. It's just a wall of hate. I'm not interested. I mean, obviously you can use it and that's fine, you use it, but I just don't. I can't. It's just poison for the soul. I mean, TikTok comments are bad enough sometimes. I don't need to read a wall of nonsense. But yeah, so I wouldn't worry about it. But again, it's because I think it's touched a nerve. People are grieving. They're grieving the loss of something that's personal to them. Even if they never met the man. I mean, I never met Prince Philip, but I understand what he meant, what he represented for British culture and ultimately British history. Yeah, I mean, and let's face it, as I said before, when she goes, and she will, probably in the next 10 years, if she's anything like her mother, she'll hit 100. I mean, she's 96 now, I believe, if memory serves. So she could hit a century. When she goes, the nation will go into, it'll be a seismic shift in British culture. British people will have to reevaluate themselves and their place in the world. Because what people forget about the royal family is, I mean, my father was a babe in arms when the Queen was crowned. And British people still had ration books. We were still under rationing 8 years after the end of the Second World War in Europe. So she was not only a war princess, because she served as a car mechanic during the Second World War, and he was obviously a naval officer, her husband. But she was also our last empress. When she was crowned, the British Empire still existed in some sort of weak form. We still had colonies. I think we still had Barbados and Bermuda and other places. So she's got 1 foot in our imperial past and 1 foot in our post-imperial present. And I'm not trying to glorify the empire or anything. Certainly not on an Irishman's channel. But but the thing is that we can still pretend slightly that we're globally important. But when she dies, I mean, he's already gone. But when she dies, we are going to have to look at ourselves in the mirror and go, who are we now? What embodies us? Where are we? How are we moving forward? How are we evolving? So yeah, it's purely metaphysical and figurative and romantic and ultimately silly, but that's what we've got. So yeah.
Yeah, well, as I said, I don't have anything else to kind of say or to talk about that. So one of the other topics that I had was the problems that I have with the term ableism. Are you familiar with that term?
I am indeed familiar with the
Okay.
term ableism.
Okay, so I can understand where a lot of people are coming from when they talk about, like, when they accuse someone of being ableist, right? I
Yep.
completely understand that, right?
Yeah.
And look, like, my whole kind of thing on it is like, just don't be a dick. Like, if there's somebody who's in a fucking wheelchair, don't make fun of somebody who's in a wheelchair, right? If there's somebody who's lost a limb, don't make fun of them because they've lost a limb, right? Don't make fun or like don't make fun of or don't disparage somebody, who has Asperger's syndrome or who has Tourette's or who has like any of these sorts of things. Just don't be a dick, right? That's my like entire view on the whole thing. But the way the ableism has been like turned and has been adopted by your kind of, it's not just really, it's not just SJWs. It's like the evolved form of SJWs. The way that they have kind of taken it and that they have now kind of like used and adopted it. So why I kind of brought this up as a topic is because somebody who's in one of the atheist communities online, fairly kind of prominent guy, as in like he has like a call-in show. He's had Matt Dillahunty, who is like the father of like modern atheism or like modern discourse around
Internet. Yeah, I
atheism.
know.
Yeah,
I know, Mr. Dillahunty. Yeah.
yeah, he's like literally probably the most famous atheist alive, right? Like obviously like Hitchens took the mantle before he kind of rose to the stature that he's at right now. But the point is, he's had him on his show, so he's like a pretty big deal, right? He's not like a low level, like less than 1,000 sub person or whatever. He also has his own show aside from the fact that he has a college show, and like where he just like talks about like politics and stuff like this. So the video that I'm specifically referring to is the one that he did on Lil Nas X, and the fact that like that whole thing, and the song and the human blood and the shoe, that whole
Yes. Yep.
that whole episode. And so basically he was kind of covering the fact that like this was happening, I guess, and kind of like the kind of discourse that was online following the release of the story and the music video and everything else. And Caitlin Poo Poo Bennett put it. I give nicknames to everybody that I don't like, by the way. That's so the last time that you were on, what was it, Ben Shapipi? So I'm still trying to think of one for Michael Knowles. I haven't got one yet, but I'm sure.
How about Michael Knowles? Nothing.
Michael Knowles, not that. That's actually pretty good. That's actually pretty good. Not gonna lie to you. That's almost definite to be the nickname going forward. So she had tweeted out that it was on days like this that she's happy to be blocked by Lil Nas. And he quote tweeted her. So I guess he unblocked her because there was a back and forth, and you can't do that if you're blocked by someone. So I guess he unblocked her for at least the sake of this discussion that then happened. Where like he basically tweeted out that he can still see her tweets and then called her shitty pants, right? Because of the rumor that when Caitlin Bennett was in Kent State, she got ridiculously drunk and then she shot herself, right? And hilarious fucking story, by the way. But this person, and why I want to talk about ableism, is he he made the claim that it was ableist of him to talk about the rumor that Caitlin Bennett shit herself because there are people who have like intestinal issues or digestive issues that will lead to that happening. Therefore, it's not okay to make fun of that thing because this is an act. And I'm like, oh my God, how much of a fucking Stretch Armstrong, shout out to the fucking 90s kids, did you have to do to make that connection? Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, no, it's just a crude ego defense mechanism, isn't it? The idea that, instead of dealing with the embarrassment of soiling oneself because one got drunk, you make the other person look like a total bigot who makes fun of the disabled, even though that's clearly not what he's doing.
yes.
Ableism is a postmodernist concept that I'm actually taking, because I should point out to those people who are watching, I work for a bank, and that's as much as I'm telling anybody. But recently I've gone through diversity and inclusion training, diversity and inclusion training. And it's something that diversity and inclusion philosophy is something that I absolutely despise, because I know where it comes from. I understand the underpinnings of it. It's not just being nice to minority groups. If only it were that simple. And ableism is one manifestation of it. And I'll actually, do you know what, Stephen? I've got something prepared, but not for this stream. I'll read you a description of ableism that I wrote and that I'm sending to my managers because I'm taking on this particular philosophy, right? So please bear with me and then tell me what you think. Right. Where am I? Right. Disability disappears. There is only differently abled. Theory posits that disability is not a condition of the body, but a failure of society to accommodate diversity. This is dangerously stupid. As someone with a history of depression, I would not like being told that my broken mind is just fine the way it is. Treatment is in order and to be encouraged. The trouble with ableism... Oh, Steve, you disappeared.
No, I'm still here.
Look, the trouble with ableism is that it tells people that there are no disabilities, that there is only difference of ability, and therefore society, in its quest for egalitarianism, must accommodate all differences. So if you mock somebody who is disabled, which is a naughty word you're not allowed to use in some circles, then what you're actually doing is you're making them feel less than. You're putting them below you. Going back to your example of mocking someone in a real wheelchair, for example. Now, while it's not nice to mock someone in a wheelchair because their life is hard enough without you taking the piss, mocking, friendly banter between friends can actually make light of the tragedy of being in a wheelchair. But of course, this is an example of concept creep, because what's happening now is that any comment perceived to be negative about anything that might be construed as a disability becomes a violation of a protected class. And that's why I agree with you. Ableism, the concept of ableism, is toxic.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't even kind of thought about it from that angle, but I do wholeheartedly agree with you. I mean, like, so if a comedian, right, has a disability of some description, right, there's a comedian, Brad Williams, I think is his name. He has dwarfism, and he constantly does jokes about him being a dwarf, right? So if I go to one of his comedy shows and I laugh at a joke that he tells about him having dwarfism, like, is that ableist? Because I think it should be.
But it would be
under the,
it would be
under the criteria and the conditions that they're giving us about what is ableist and what is not. Then that would be ableist, right? Because you're laughing at somebody because they have a disability, right? Yeah. So
the trouble is that every single joke ever told that's funny is at someone's expense. So ultimately, if you are making a joke about dwarfism or even, I mean, don't get me wrong, say jokes about, I don't know, Chinese drivers, for example. There used to be a big thing in the 70s and 80s about Chinese people can't drive or something daft like that. Or, these are all racist jokes. So every
Mm,
single joke is a joke at someone's expense. The difference is, though, is the context in which the joke is told. Am I telling a joke to make the other people feel, the subject feels slighted, or am I telling the joke to make light of something that we all understand the significance of, but don't want it to weigh on our souls? There's the Ricky, again, I'm going back to Ricky Gervais. Ricky Gervais says there's a difference between the subject and the object of the humor. So the
yeah.
subject could be being a dwarf, but the butt of the joke need not be the dwarf themselves. It could be something as some
Mm,
aspect of living as a dwarf. The trouble is that modern generations, Gen Z, I'm going to blame, but let's face it, young millennials too. I count as an old millennial, so I'm not part of that group. Young millennials and Gen Z, they don't actually know what comedy is. They don't understand its social or psychological function, and therefore they think that any joke where a protected class is featured is a comment against them rather than rather than bringing them into the fold. So, like, for example, there's the comedian, I don't know if you've ever seen him, Lewis Black, who played Anger
heard
in the
of him,
film.
yeah.
Yeah, he played Anger in the film Inside Out. He's very loud and aggressive, right? He's Jewish, a Jewish New Yorker, and he talks like a Jewish New Yorker. He's clearly born and raised in that city, and he does many jokes at the expense of the chosen people. Does that make him an anti-Semite?
Does
By
he have does he have like a ridiculously husky speaking voice? Am I talking about the right
Oh
person?
my God, you guys! Oh my God! He appears on the Daily Show with Trevor Noah on occasion. He wears glasses. He often
No,
points at the camera. It looks a bit shambolic. If you look him up
okay,
on the
we
internet,
are
you probably recognize him.
we are talking about different people like right now, but I still do think that I know who Lewis Black is. I was just confusing him for someone else. I can't think of the name of the guy.
If I
Anyway,
saw,
sorry.
if you find him on the internet, you'd see his
Hmm.
picture and go, "Ah, I think I've seen this bloke before." But yeah, the trouble is that it's like, is he when Mr. Black tells a joke that flirts with certain Jewish caricatures or tropes, is he doing it
Yeah,
at
it
the
is him. That's who I was thinking about. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've
yeah,
just
yeah.
googled him.
So
Yeah,
is he doing
yeah.
it at the expense of his own tribe, or is he doing it because he's just making light of something, or he's trying to get a rise out of the audience? And all of this is contextual. So it could be any one of the answer could be any one of these. It depends on what was said, how it was said, and why it was said. All of these things matter. But
Hmm.
young millennials and Gen Z don't get that. Young millennials and Gen Z just assume that if the joke is about black people, disabled people, women, homosexuals, trans people, or whatever, that
Hmm.
it's done at their expense purely to keep them under the thumb, because they have been taught at university, and this is where you as a socialist might have to deal with some of this stuff on a more personal level. They have been taught the neo-Marxist paradigm of oppressor versus oppressed. They've been taught that if you, Stephen Ryan, as a cisgendered pink person with a penis, you make a joke about, say, a black woman, that you're doing it because you have suffered from racial bias, and therefore you must be corrected. And this stuff is a dangerous idea. It's dangerous. It's dangerous, and it will damage the social fabric, because it means that every conversation, every meeting is passively adversarial, if such a thing is possible, because it means that you're constantly considering the power balance in every conversation, in every meeting, right? And that's not healthy. It's just not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah, like so I could oh my god, I could rant on this issue for like literally days. I could spend like not even joking 3 hours just ranting about this issue like because it is one. So I'm a millennial. I fall into that category and I've done stand-up comedy before. So like comedy is like one of those things that I like. Oh my god, like I love comedy. Like I absolutely love comedy, and I even as the kind of ultra progressive, very left kind of person that I am, like I have a very dark sense of humor.
Oh
So
yeah.
I have let's just kind of to rattle off some. My sense of humor would be very kind of online with Jimmy Carr, Frankie Boyle, Louis C.K. Kind of like old school George Carlin, fucking Jim Jeffries, Jim Norton, um, Daniel Sloss. Like there's so
So
many.
you mean actual talented comedians?
Wait, well, yes,
No, see, this
but
is it. I approve of your list. But do you know why? Do you know why a dark sense of humor is actually a sign of a healthy psyche? It's because it's something that Stephen Colbert said. Now, Stephen Colbert is obviously in the world of light entertainment, but he said
mm,
famously
mm,
many moons ago, it is impossible to laugh at something and be afraid of it at the same time. We laugh because at the tragedy of life. So we're all, let's, as I said when we were talking to Keela, we all have the same destination. We're all going to be planted and we're all probably going to be forgotten. That's highly likely. And on our way to the grave, we are going to encounter hurdles, some of which we won't be able to leap over. And some of those hurdles might be random accidents, they might be medical diagnoses, it might be professional trauma, it might be all sorts of weird and wonderful things. And we laugh at the darkness in life because it makes the darkness bearable. The trouble is with those our fellow citizens who are younger than us is that they've been taught that the darkness of life is something to either or push away or hide. So they haven't got
mm,
that reflex mechanism. I mean, I remember discovering Bill Hicks when I was 17 years old, way back in the
mm,
midst of time. I remember when Frankie Boyle was so edgy that there were calls to ban him in the national press. Not so much anymore because he's drifted to your side of the aisle. He's become sort of a weird quasi middle-aged socialist. But all of that stuff, and it means that when the darkness happens, when you encounter darkness, you have a psychic toolbox that you can use to deal with the horror. So I remember telling jokes at my grandmother's funeral while I was mourning because the pain of
yes,
that.
yes,
What?
yes.
But because and obviously we didn't do it during the service. We didn't just take the piss because the old lady was going into the crematorium. But you have to giggle through the tears because that's the only way. Otherwise,
Mm,
you'd mentally collapse. But this is why I think a lot of, and again, I'm going to blame the youngsters again. I sound like my father. But Gen Z and middle, this is why a lot of them are so histrionic. A lot of them, they scream and they shout when something bad happens because they haven't actually prepared for such an event. So if I told someone, I mean, you must have noticed this with younger people, when you tell them they can't do something or they haven't got the job or the work isn't good enough or something like that, you're labeled a hater, and then they start blubbing and they start. You go, this is you're mentally infantile. You need to grow up. You need to develop not a thicker, well, I suppose a thicker skin is one way of phrasing it, but you need to be
mm.
slightly more calloused to the horrors and the disappointments of life because they're coming. The disappointments are coming, and you're not going to get that job you wanted, and you're going to break your leg, and you are going to miss out on that an audition, or someone else who's not deserving will get the promotion over you, and all these little things will happen to you, and you've got to be ready for that. And I don't think these kids are truly. Anyway, that's my rant over. I'm sorry. I should stop filling the airwaves.
Yeah, no, like no. You're fine. I'm kind of getting ready to kind of do one myself, to be totally honest with you, because this is an issue that so this is where I very kind of unusually where two different aspects of my life kind of overlap or coexist for a way of explaining it, where my psychology background and my love of comedy and love of obviously watching comedy but also doing comedy kind of overlap, because as you kind of just described, and my reaction, my grieving method is to make jokes. It's how I grieve, it's how I cope with grief, right? So when my granddad died 11 years ago, this year, the following couple of days, I just made jokes. It's how I cope with it. So, and it's the same for so many different people. So who the fuck is you or I or anybody else to tell somebody that they can't grieve the only way that they know how? Why is that okay? Why is that right? Yes, it may not be your way of grieving, but your way of grieving is not my way of grieving. You know what I mean? I'm sure
Mm.
it's I'm sure it's nicer and it's not going to offend everybody if you just sit on it in a chair in the corner on your own, blubbering for, weeks, if not months on end. If that's how you grieve, that's how you grieve. I'm not going to judge you for that, but don't try and force me to do that simply because it's more socially acceptable. Fuck
Yeah.
that. It's absolutely insane. And it's not just grief, but it's sometimes how people deal with trauma. I had talked to Keela. It was offline. I have a friend who was the victim of a sexual assault, and her coping mechanism for it is to make jokes about what happened to her. Now, I understand that in almost every circumstance, people don't want you to make something as serious and as severe as rape funny. I completely understand that. And I don't do rape jokes simply because, like, okay, so there's a number of reasons why I don't. They are incredibly fucking easy to mess up, because if you don't do a rape joke perfectly, you're making fun of rape, and if you do that, you're the biggest piece of shit on the planet. And also simply because I just don't really kind of I just don't really kind of feel like it's my place to do. I just wouldn't feel comfortable doing that, and that's my own personal choice. She is one of the reasons why me and her are friends is because she swears like a fucking trucker. She is the only woman who can go shot with me, and she is one of the funniest people that I know. Genuinely funniest people that I know. She is like, in the time that I have she confided in me and everything else. This, she has told 3 of the funniest rape jokes I have ever fucking So I have only reacted to a joke like, fucking Jesus Christ. That's only been my reaction to 4 jokes in my entire life. One of them was a guy in work, and 3 of them were like her jokes. And so, like, but look, I mean, even though I might kind of react like that, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna fucking pretend like I didn't laugh for 25 minutes after she told each and every one of those jokes, because I absolutely did. I found them fucking hilarious, right? As a person, like, it is deeply, deeply depressing and deeply upsetting that it happened to her, and that, that, like, this has to be one of her coping mechanisms. But, as an aspiring comedian, like, fucking mwah, you know what I mean? Like, just beautiful. But, like, I don't know, man. I just don't get, like, this whole ableism movement. Like, it should have began and ended as, don't be a dick. That's where it should have started, and that's where it should have ended, is just don't be a dick. But this overly, like, just impassionate objection to possibly offending someone, to me, is just, I just don't get it. I just don't understand it.
Well, I might be able to clarify. You would appreciate this because you're a former student of psychology. The psychologist B.F. Skinner said famously, when people can't control their emotions, they try to control other people's behavior. And because in recent years, the culture has become emotionally incontinent, we've gone from stoicism, which is also unhealthy, as you know, and the unnatural damning of emotions, to the unnatural overspill of emotions, where emotionality or romantic thinking, even magical thinking, informs much of what we do. It's one of the reasons I find political debates much harder now with people who disagree with me, because they start talking about their truth and their feelings. And it's like, yes, but that counts for a little bit of it, but there needs to be a bit of data behind it, and data does matter. But yeah, so what you've encountered there is the idea that because this might hurt my feelings, I need to put it in a box and lock it away so that it can't do that anymore. And if that means I need to lock you away, so be it. This is where deplatforming comes from. It's where cancel culture comes from. The idea that we can simply purge society of those elements that might threaten our mental well-being or our sense of self-worth, which is a ridiculous notion to begin with, but it's certainly one that it seems popular. And it's something, of course, I have no truck with whatsoever. I would rather deal with. I know this might sound. It sounds maybe intellectually masochistic, but I enjoy being challenged on my political points. I enjoy being challenged on my sense of right and wrong, because that's how I operate. So, but the younger people don't.
Yeah, like I don't have any aversion to my points being challenged. I openly invite it. Like, it's one of the things that, like, I loved it. So for every intro to MDD that I have done, I have said, if you disagree with me, like, stop by the channel, sub to the channel, turn on your notifications. You'll know when I'm going live. I like, if if you're a Republican, if you're a conservative, I'm a socialist, you are going to disagree with me. You know what I mean? So come on, have the conversation.
Exhibit A.
Yes, exactly. I love having the conversation. I love disagreeing with people. And it's not. We had kind of. I'm pretty sure. Definitely privately, probably publicly as well. Had our own, or have a mutual disagreement for the blood sports of it. You know what I mean? I don't want to go out and shout someone down or anything else like that. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. But the idea that, like, I don't know, just the idea that we can't talk about these things, that's just very, very weird to me. One other thing that I wanted to kind of say, so, and it's just kind of loosely kind of tied into the ableism thing, but more so like to do with like exactly what I was just kind of previously talking about. So I've said that to a number of people in my private life and stuff like that, and they've kind of asked me the question of, or they've posed the question of, like, do you not find it a little bit weird or uncomfortable if somebody makes a joke about rape, right? And no, I don't. Does that make me a monster? Does that make me a thing about at laughing at rape? No, absolutely not. This is a little bit of a combination of two people that I actually previously mentioned, of Jim Norton and Daniel Sloss. They both kind of shared this approach or this opinion, but I personally think, even though I love Daniel Sloss, I personally think that Jim Norton said it a little bit better, which is, simply because you laugh at a thing that is supposed to be serious, or that is supposed to be, never funny or never okay in any context, does not mean that you are lessening the severity of that thing. All you are doing is, just for the briefest moment in time, not allowing it to have all-consuming power over you. And that, I fucking love that quote, because that's exactly it. And that is exactly why that is a coping mechanism for my friend, because she is not allowing it to have like, what happened to her, to have all-consuming power over it. She's bigger than what happened to her in the moments where she's making jokes about it. So I would never try and, like, I find trying to stop that arguably to be a little bit more harmful or more detrimental to her than to just allow her to make a joke that might make me uncomfortable. And that, to me, is nowhere near good enough to say you can't do that.
But Stephen, you see, that's because your friend doesn't have a victim complex and doesn't want to suffer forever, and doesn't want to gain oppression points from her audience. She doesn't want to go on YouTube or TikTok or whatever and talk about it with tears running down her face and never get over the trauma. She wants the wound to heal, whereas there is a market now for eternal trauma. You can make a lot of money out of eternal trauma, even if there isn't any trauma at all. Remember, obviously, your friend has gone through a very real, horrifying experience, so that's to be respected. But you must have watched YouTube videos or TikTok videos or even Vines back in the day, where you sort of wondered what the kids were complaining about. It wasn't that severe what they were talking about, or someone said something mean on the bus and they made like an 8-minute video on it or something daft like that, and you go, you're just milking it. You're milking it because you know that a victim mentality gains an audience. It might not be a healthy audience. It might not be an audience that, because you do need people in your life to say, I'm going to help you get better. Yeah, but what's happening is that it ends up with a kind of weird narcissistic feedback loop whereby you are either a victim or you pretend to be a victim, and then your audience responds to your victimhood, and because you enjoy the positive response from the audience, you maintain your victimhood. And so it's as again, you're a psychologist, you would know this. It means that the wound never closes. It means that you never learn. It means that you never gain anything. And that's where we are as a culture.
Just the like absolute mildest of pushback that I've ever given to any of your points, and again, genuinely just mild. I don't personally, think that there is anything inherently wrong with going on to any of the kind of social media platforms and telling your story or like talking about something that has happened to you, even with tears going down your face. However, where we would be in agreement is to continue doing that and to never, after talking about what has happened to you and after doing the very kind of like public thing of, tears going down your face, recounting your story, everything else like that, not then starting the steps necessary to move on, not to get over, because there are some things in life that you're just never going to get over. They are that severe, but to cope with the rest of life, to just move on with the rest of life. There we're in perfect agreement, but I just don't necessarily think that there's anything inherently wrong with doing like the first video about a given topic where it's very real and raw and stripped back and tears going down your face, everything else like that. That's the only. And again, I think you will agree that's the mildest bit of pushback I've ever given. So
no, not at all. But no, you're right. Making that video, I mean, I know because I've done it. I've made TikTok videos where I talk about SA or I talk about discrimination and things like that. So I know I've done it myself. But it's always been with the view of I'm putting the story out there. So first of all, if you have also suffered something similar, you know that you're not alone, which is always good. But
yes,
I will do one video. I will do one video, and then that will pretty much be it. And the only time I'll respond, I might respond to a comment, but I won't milk it because that's a sign that you're becoming a kind of misery merchant. So making a video about your traumatic experience, whatever it happens to be, the death of your father, or you suffered a health crisis, you've had a cancer diagnosis, or whatever, that's perfectly fine. And even if you do 1 or 2 videos on it, it's not necessarily a problem. But there is a kind of trend, and you see it with a lot of younger creators, whereby it's all that they talk about, and they don't. It's like they're milking the audience for the kind of emotional response that victimhood gains. And so maybe it's just my innate cynicism, and I would accept that point. But when I get the sense that the creator is milking it, I stop watching them. So you can go on YouTube, you perform a search function, you can find any number of videos about traumatic experiences. But you're right, the first video isn't the problem. The 10th video is. When you get to that stage where you're basically just repeating yourself as well, there doesn't seem. I mean, I wouldn't mind if people charted their journey to recovery. That's at least constructive. And that at least shows the audience that it is possible to recover. But if all you're doing is pumping out a video a week, being miserable, at some point I'm going, and maybe not immediately, but at some point I'm going to think, I don't think you want to be better. I don't think you want to be healed or whole. I think you want to be broken because that's your brand. And when I smell branding, I tune out. That's it. Really?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, that's kind of all fair enough and kind of understandable. Yeah, look, like I just don't think we kind of did kind of veer off topic a little bit. My whole kind of problem with the whole ableist thing is like, oh God, yeah, Jesus, we really, really did veer off topic, because what I was going to say after that was In the same video that this person was covering, where Caitlyn said, or sorry, where Lil Nas called her shitty pants, there was a tweet that Caitlyn Bennett put back to. So in response to that tweet, Caitlyn Bennett asked him if, or sorry, asked him when the last time he spoke to his father was. Now, Lil Nas is African American,
Yep.
and it's, look, that is, I don't care like where you are, that is a racist stereotype
Yeah.
that black fathers leave, that they don't have any contact with their fathers, and stuff like that. And the beautiful bit of irony is that he actually has a fantastic relationship with his father, and like, I'm pretty sure he was actually there on the set when they were filming the video, sort of thing. Like, so they're they're pretty. The point is like, like, when somebody is going to engage in that, and yet your main kind of video, or your main kind of like focus in that video is, hey, don't be ableist. Not that I'm necessarily saying that he is, because I genuinely, not for a moment, would ever levy this accusation against this person. But it comes across to me, and I'm sure to a lot of other people as well, as if he was like almost indirectly defending Caitlyn, but her being explicitly and like ridiculously racist in that. It's kind of like he's also defending racism, which, look, I get that that's a little bit of a stretch, right? And I know that that was not his intention, but that's a potential of how that could come across to an audience who does not know this creator and does not know their background and stuff like that. So like, it's when it's even a remote possibility that you can be seen as potentially defending someone who is ridiculously racist, like that to me is just, well, it's obviously something that I would never ever do. And I would also wonder about somebody who would defend someone who is racist. That's it. And I don't care if it's on the grounds of ableism. I don't care. If she did actually shit herself, and she's going out and she's being like as racist and as transphobic and as homophobic as YouTube will like possibly allow her to be, no, I'm sorry, fuck her. You get to deserve to be called shitty pants. Simple as.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a cheap racist gag, isn't it? The idea that black men doesn't know who his father is, and yeah, I mean, I can imagine that. Yeah, I mean, it is just a racist comment. I don't know. It's a weird one for me because, well, as someone who is called racist on a daily basis because he's right of center and therefore I must be, I tend to take the accusation of racism. I don't treat it seriously anymore, unless you bring me strong concrete evidence of racial prejudice. I just don't accept the label anymore because it's a classic boy cried wolf situation. I just don't believe it anymore. Everything's racist now. If band-aids are the wrong color, that's considered racial oppression now, but that's a different conversation we could have at some point. So yeah, I mean, she made a racist joke, but I don't know whether that makes her fundamentally racist, if that makes any sense. Maybe she's just repeating something she read somewhere else. I have to give them the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, it's a cheap shot because, again, it's not a personal joke in the sense that it's not actually a comment on Lil Nas at all. It's just something that she's recycled from something else. So yeah, I'm not defending the joke. I'm not going to defend racism for obvious reasons because that's not the sort of joke I would make. It's like the implication, isn't it, that the black people can't read? That's another one that comes up a lot. It's a kind of a cheap gag that they can't read. I would send you a constructive comment, but I don't think you'd be able to read it. Something like that. Yeah, again, it's not. The worst part of it is that it's just unimaginative. That it's a cheap shot that you've recycled from some other source, and it doesn't really expand the topic. It doesn't really deliver any nuances. It's just you defending your ego from the bruising it's received with some cheap gag you found on the internet, and that's a major problem, I think.
Yeah, that kind of almost kind of beautifully transitions us into our next topic. So, Kendon, shall we talk about whether or not Tucker Carlson is a Nazi?
Yeah, we can do. I'm going to say Tucker Carlson. I mean, but first of all, the problem with Tucker Carlson is that he appears on Fox News, and I refuse to watch Fox News because I can read. It is a comic book movie for fascists. Not suggesting that the audience is all fascistic, but there is something about Fox News that is utterly terrifying to my delicate middle class Tory sensibilities. The reason I don't watch Fox News is because there's far too much shouting, it's far too colourful, and there's not enough nuanced discussion. Fox and Friends is a nightmare. Have you ever actually sat and watched about 10 minutes of Fox and Friends?
I wouldn't if you paid me to. No.
Well, the thing about
but to be fair, before anybody accuses me of being partisan, like if you ask me, have I ever sat and watched CNN or MSNBC, I'd give you the exact same response. No, not if you paid me to. So
no, I mean I've watched extended segments of is it Don Lemon and Rachel Maddow and what was his name, Keith Olbermann, and back when he was still had a career, and I've watched Fox and Friends, and it's quite remarkable actually. It's usually two fat guys in business suits with two MILFs sitting on a sofa, delivering the same talking point four different ways. It's quite incredible. It's a conversation between robots that have been programmed with the same talking points. It's quite remarkable. And so I'm not a big fan of Fox News as a general rule. And Tucker Carlson just strikes me as just another puppet, just another salesman. I don't know whether he believes half of what he says, but he doesn't strike me as a sincere character.
Yeah. Well, look, I won't leave my audience in suspense any longer, so we'll just add this to there, and we'll blow that up.
Hello.
Press play. I'm sorry. Yes, I know. I can see the comments now. Is there any pixels? There's nothing I can do about it. All right, it's as pixelated as it is. It's just fucking deal with it.
I'm laughing because this is one of about 10 stories that I know you've covered, where the government shows preference to people who have shown absolute contempt for our customs, our laws, our system itself, and they're being treated better than American citizens. Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true. If this was happening in your house, if you were in 6th grade, for example, and without telling you, your parents adopted a bunch of new siblings and gave them brand new bikes and let them stay up later and help them with their homework and gave them twice the allowance that they gave you, you would say to your siblings, I think we're being replaced by kids that our parents love more. And it would be kind of hard to argue against you because look at the evidence. So this matters on a bunch of different levels, but on the most basic level, it's a voting rights question. In a democracy, one person equals one vote. If you change the population, you dilute the political power of the people who live there. So every time they import a new voter, I become disenfranchised as a current voter. So I don't understand why we don't understand this. I mean, everyone wants to make a racial issue out of it. Ooh, the white replacement theory. No. This is a voting rights question. I have less political power because they're importing a brand new electorate. Why should I sit back and take that? The power that I have as an American guaranteed at birth is one man, one vote, and they're diluting it. No, they're not allowed to do that. Why are we putting up with this?
So, what did we think about that, Kendon?
Right, I've got mixed views of it, and I'll tell you why. I am familiar with the theory of the Great Replacement, which is a far-right talking point, and I know that it's a far-right talking point because obviously I operate in circles vastly different from yours, and therefore counter creatures that should really stay in the storm drain. There are lots of people who will post questions like, what do you think about Islam? What do you think about Tommy Robinson? Because they're trying to sniff me out. They're trying to work out whether I am truly one of the dark side as opposed to just a moderate Tory. The Great Replacement, for those who don't know, and I'm sure your audience knows already, is the idea that for reasons that are not quite established. The native pink populations of Western countries are being replaced by other coloured foreigners who are more obedient to their corporate and political masters, thereby diluting existing cultures, and all the great old European cultures will disappear because they're being swarmed by brown people from the desert or wherever. This is obviously garbage in the sense that you can't just wipe out one not without doing it actively. You can't replace one population with another. This is the worst way of doing it. If that was the ultimate plan, you're not doing it properly, basically. But what he says at the end kind of skews the pitch a bit, because he's pointed out that he doesn't want to make it a race thing, but there is a sense that I don't really know how to talk, because it's such a big topic. It's such a big topic that I don't know how far back in time you want to go, Stephen, if I'm being honest with you. Because this goes back, we're talking about 4 decades of demographic change, at least in the UK. I mean, I can't speak for America necessarily, but there is some truth to what he says towards the end of that clip. It's his motives that I don't quite trust.
Yeah, well, I mean, so my kind of takeaway from it, right, about, him kind of generally complaining about, people who are coming into the country and who are voting for Democrats, right, and him being very, very angry about this, to me is, and I know that Tucker did this in this way. I know that he did this in this way. And even though this kind of seemed a little bit less scripted than, his kind of monologues, right? Or if he's covering a story, right? It did kind of seem like it was just kind of like more of like an off the cuff thing. I do think it was rehearsed in a very specific way, because Tucker has done this thing for a very, very, very long time, pretty much ever since he took over Bill O'Reilly's spot. Which is he has said these certain things, but left them with to a greater or smaller degree, depending on what and when he is talking about. This slight air of recoverability. I know that that's not even a word, but like he, if he's called out on it, he can be like, whoa, hey, no, that's not what I meant at all, because he's using this very, very specific language. However, that clip that we have just seen, to me, was eerily similar to the chants that we all heard in Charlottesville 2 years ago, when they were talking about the Jews will not replace us. Yeah, what he is saying by him saying, all of these immigrants that are coming in and stuff like that, and we don't want this because my political power is them being, like it's just eerily similar to it. And I don't think that anybody in good conscience would say that the people who were at Charlottesville were not Nazis, because they were literally saying the Jews will not fucking replace us, blood and soil and the like, right? So nobody would say that they weren't Nazis. And if this is eerily similar to it, it's...
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate it. It's the word replace. It's the word replace that does it. If he had said something like they are expanding the electorate, then that would be forgivable. I think that would be the confusion would appear. They're expanding the electorate because, let's face it, immigrants are grateful to whichever party gave them a visa. So if the Democrats are the ones that bring them in, they will vote Democrat, basically, because why would you vote Republican? If the Democrats are the ones that brought you in, obviously you're going to vote Democrat because they're the ones that rewarded you with a chance to live in the new world. So that would be fine. But the fact it's the replacement aspect. Now, this is where I think this is where the topic broadens, and I might have to talk for about 5 or 6 minutes on this. So I promise, well, no, I won't. I'll try and keep it short. Back in the 1980s, the glorious 1980s, where St. Ronald Reagan and Mrs. Thatcher were stomping all over the world, the working class vote collapsed because they smashed the unions, both in the US and in the UK. And without the unions, the working class had no power. Their clout was the unions. There is no international workers' movement anymore. The left-wing parties in the UK and in the US, who historically had always tapped the working class vote, said, we need to expand our voting base. So they became minority parties. And that's why, if you notice, around about the 1980s through into the 90s, left-wing parties started talking about sexual minorities, religious minorities, and ethnic minorities, because they wanted to mop up that vote that didn't, the others, the outsiders, the people on the fringes of society. The problem with this idea, and you can see this in the UK, like, for example, when Tony Blair came to power in 1997, he liberalized the immigration rules for people coming into Britain. And we saw an influx of people from Central Asia, a lot of Pakistanis, Kashmiris, Bangladeshis coming into the UK. Now, I'm not suggesting that's a bad thing, because most of them are decent enough. They're just trying to get through life. But obviously, it was a ploy, because they knew that they would vote Labour. Back in the 1970s, when we expanded our working base to plug gaps in our workforce, we also imported waves of people from Central Asia, and they moved to Labour strongholds. They moved to places like, I don't know, Cheetham Hill in Manchester or wherever, and have voted Labour ever since. So it is a way of increasing your share of the vote by creating new populations that will be eternally grateful to those who give them the visa. But yeah, it's that word replace. It's that word replace. It's the idea that the native pink population is going to be wiped out or outbred by hordes of people coming across the border legally or illegally. Yeah, it's the wrong verb. It's the wrong verb, Mr. Carlson. Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I don't know whether he understands exactly what he's saying. I maybe I'm just being naive and I'm impersonating an ostrich, but I don't like the idea of labeling him until I get more concrete proof. I don't want to label him with the N word, not the first N word, the other N word. Yeah, that's just where I'm coming from on it, I think. What do you reckon? Is it just cowardice on my part, or have I got grounds to be
I'm still trying to work out what the other N word is.
Well, the N word that you use against black people, and then there's the N word Nazi.
But yeah. Sorry. Yes, sorry. Yeah. How fucking stupid of me. Of course, I opened this up by asking you the question. Yeah.
It's not, to me, it's not enough to simply say the fact that he said the word replace is not enough. And the fact that he did sort of correct himself at the end, or suggest that he sort of put down the whole race baiting argument at the end, doesn't absolve him necessarily, but it does make me doubt my own judgment. I would need to see more concrete, because he would need to be, is he passionately anti-Semitic? Is he passionately anti-corporate? Is he, does he think that interracial marriages are flawed? Is he either a Protestant, a committed Protestant, or a pagan? Is he, these are all tropes of National Socialism. And I can't just label the man with the second N word just because he's used the word replace in the context of immigration. That alone isn't enough to sell it to me. I would need more evidence.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, Tucker Carlson has previously in the past, he has described, or when he's been talking about immigration, he has said that they make, and like, this is quote, they make our country poorer and dirtier when talking about immigrants coming into the country.
Well, it depends on what immigrants he's talking about. If he's talking about illegal immigrants crossing the border with no papers, and everything else, poorer, yes, because obviously they're a drain on resources and they're not necessarily contributing to society. Dirtier, yeah, okay, it depends on context. But the thing is that he can't be opposed to all. Well, I suppose he could be opposed to all immigration. That's a perfectly solid political position if one is so inclined. But yeah, that alone isn't enough to skew it. It depends on which immigrants he's talking about, and it depends on what context they come into the country. But dirtier, yeah, it's a bit. Yeah,
Like, yeah, it's just all this kind of like race baity language, and
yeah.
it's like it's been going on for a very long time.
It flirts with it. It flirts with the far right. I'm not going to lie. It flirts with the far right, and even I'm aware of the Great Replacement. And there are other creatures on the internet, some of whom I actually follow purely because I want the material. People like, do you remember a woman called Lauren Southern? Have you heard of a woman called Lauren Southern, a blonde Canadian woman who appears on YouTube?
Yes, that name is very familiar to me, but
she disappeared for a couple of years. She disappeared for a couple of years to get married, and she's just come back onto YouTube. Obviously, you know of Stefan Molyneux. I'm sure you've heard of him.
Oh yeah, yes. Yeah,
Stefan Molyneux, the everyone's favorite software salesman. They are just flirting with far right race theory. I mean, they just are, and anyone who says otherwise is lying, or they just don't know what they're on about. They are flirting with it. Tucker Carlson, maybe it's because he's on Fox News. Maybe he couldn't come out and say "Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer" because, of course, that would give the game away. But I'd love to hear him in private. I'd love to bug his phone or put a camera somewhere in his office before he goes on air, just to hear him talk about issues.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, is he like Tucker Carlson? Like, there's literally so many things that I could say. Like, it was a moderately big story a couple of months ago that one of Tucker Carlson's now ex-writers was outed as was he just like an extreme racist, or was he like a neo-Nazi? I'm not 100% sure which one. But again, the point is, it was one or the other. But he was one of his head writers. But like the question that the left was kind of asking itself at the time was how much of this head writer's extremely racist opinions made it into Tucker Carlson's monologues, or like his his conversations about these issues. And like the fact that like all of these types of people, like Tucker Carlson, fucking Ben Shapiro, weirdly, because he's Jewish,
he's a Sephardic Jew married to a Moroccan. It's
like there's any number of these guys. It's just really, really suspicious to me that like these sorts those sorts of people are very attracted to them, and I just find that to be very, very problematic. I find it to be very, very strange.
One of the reasons why I, on my TikTok channel, draw people from the far right, not many, I've got one or two that maybe appear in the comment section, I can even remember some of their usernames, is because conservative-minded people like me like borders, we like nation states, we like preserving traditional culture, etc., as much as we can. Obviously, everything needs reform now and then, but we like to pass things down to the next generation. Well, so do the far right. It's a question of degree rather than principle. So, for example, if you believe that your culture should be preserved as much as possible, that doesn't necessarily mean put it under a bell jar. But if you're a far right activist, it does. Some people define nation as people who live in a particular country, whereas the far right will say people of a certain color who live in a particular country. So it's a difference of degree. And so this is why I think where a lot of people on the left, and I'm not putting you in this category because I don't know if it's true of you, a lot of people on the left who are socialists, communists, or whatever, even like Almighty Vosh, for example, it would do them well to remember that while it might sound eerily like the extremists that nobody appreciates, it might not actually be evidence of hidden prejudice. Because you must have known, we've talked about this before, Stephen, the lack of nuance in political debate, the fact that if you're to the right of Karl Marx, you're a Nazi. If you're to the left of Mrs. Thatcher, you're a communist. There's no middle ground anymore. There's no nuance of debate. There's no subtlety, no detail. And I think this is where, and it's not just the left, it's also the right as well. We're losing a lot of this. And I think, is Tucker Carlson a closet neo-Nazi? I've got no idea. No idea. I understand why you suspect he might be, because he's using that word replace in the context of immigration, but that alone isn't enough. I would need to see a bank of evidence to prove, to believe that he was keeping his true disposition quiet.
Yeah, well, see, this is what I'm kind of saying, is because, I mean, like, obviously, like, he can't just go out on his show and,
give the salute.
Yeah, and just kind of like very, very openly say, yes, I see absolutely nothing wrong with what happened in Charlottesville. They were all wonderful, beautiful, strong alpha males. Like he can't
Alpha
do
Aryans.
that. Well, yes. Sorry. Yes, jeez, of course. How can I make that mistake? The point, like, he obviously can't do that because he would be outing himself, right? Or he would be, it's a term that he would be ripping the mask off, right?
Yeah.
So he obviously can't do that, but that's what I'm kind of saying. Like, he would say as much as he can do while still keeping the veneer of being, who, what, me, bro? No, I'm just trying to, present both sides or something to that effect, right?
If he genuinely believes in the great voter replacement theory, then I can see the logic behind it. Even if you don't agree with his position, I understand it. If the great voter replacement theory is a cover for the great white replacement theory, then yeah, you're absolutely right. The man's a Nazi. But again, it's the word replace. It's a bit like when do you remember when in one of the debates that Donald Trump had with Joe Biden, he was talking about one of those mobs, the Proud Boys or something, and he said, stand back and stand by. Do you remember that phrase?
Yeah.
Do you remember who made that statement? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has said, oh, stand by. He wants to get them to get ready to go to war. And it's like, no, darlings, that's where we get the word bystander from. Stand by means stand to one side. But people took that phrase and ran with it, and they said, this is proof that he's using them as like a paramilitary force. And I went, nah, don't buy it. That in itself isn't enough. There might be what you want it to mean, and I understand why you want it to mean that, but I can't side with that. And I think this is, and again, like, Stephen, I don't want you to get the impression that I'm pouring water on your concerns with regard to Tucker Carlson, because as I said before, I don't like Fox News. I don't like the way they do business. I don't like the way they shout at the camera, and I don't like the fact that their debates are unnuanced. I mean, face it, Bill O'Reilly was a nightmare as an interviewer. He was a terrible interviewer because he would he'd invite people he disagreed with and just scream at them. I mean, that's no way to conduct yourself even in private conversation, never mind on telly. But again, as someone who has had to be, or has been on the receiving end of misconstrued statements or phrases or whatever, I know what it's like to be judged, to be misjudged and labeled incorrectly. And I would hate to do that to somebody else, even if it seems blindingly obvious to everybody else that the label fits.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, maybe I'm like just a little bit less charitable than you. I don't know.
Well, yeah. Do you know what? In 6 months' time, it will find pictures of him on the internet carving a swastika into his skin, and then I'll look like a fool. But until that day, I am no. But do you know what? I will keep an eye on this. Actually, I'm going to watch a bit more Tucker Carlson. I mean, I've seen some Tucker Carlson clips, like Samantha Bee. Have you heard of the comedian Samantha Bee? She did a whole thing about Tucker Carlson being a white supremacist. Vox have done some Vox pops on, videos on Tucker Carlson being a white supremacist. But again, whenever they brought up clips, it was what he said was fairly innocuous, but they just extrapolated. And I went, well, circumstantial evidence is not hard evidence. That's all I would say.
Sorry, I'm just responding to Ian,
yes,
but with an extra I in the
hello, Ian.
comment section there.
I think it's a Scottish spelling of Ian. Hello, Ian. Haven't seen you around before. There's Aunt Jer. I don't know who Aunt Jer is, but very welcome to turn up.
Aunt Jer is a friend of the channel. I've seen her regularly. Yeah, regularly.
Soldier of Science, I think, has disappeared.
Yeah, I presume it's the she her pronouns because and so I'm just stretching there. But anyhow, I'm so sorry. I really wish you had just rambled for a little while longer.
No.
So I could talk about this.
I was at the risk of, because one thing I don't want to do is defend Tucker Carlson, because I'm not in a position to do that. It doesn't benefit me, and I don't know whether it's wise to defend him. What I am defending, I think, is the use of certain labels in the same way, because you know this, Stephen, from your own conversations with friends, where the words like fascist, communist, socialist are thrown around now with gay abandon, and it's not appropriate, because of course these words have very fixed, well, they might be lengthy, but they are considered definitions, and we lose something if we abuse these words. Like, how many times have you been called, I don't know, a commie or a communist on forums if you've been talking about politics? It's like, communism and socialism aren't the same thing. There are new subtleties there that you're missing out, but by just labeling you as just a big fat red, it cheapens the debate. But it's the same with Nazis. If I believe, for example, in tighter border control, that doesn't mean I don't want people to come here. It just means I want to vet the people that come here more carefully. And there's nothing in that. It's not the thin end of a racist wedge. But again, people will call you fascist or racist or something just because you have that position.
Yeah. So it's what was I going to say to you there? No, it's gone.
Do you think the topic's exhausted? I don't know.
Yeah. So the last one that I kind of wanted to talk about, I suppose we can kind of just like do it this way. So obviously the Derek Chauvin trial has been happening for the last 9 days, 10 days. So there's been obviously an awful lot of conversation surrounding that trial, right? Like from all different angles and from all different peoples and stuff like that. I'm sure by now you have seen, if not possibly even responded to, the TikTok that has gone semi-viral of a BLM member who said that if Derek Chauvin is not convicted, that there's going to be people protesting in the streets again, right? And that like the exact same thing that happened last year, very shortly after George Floyd's death, that's going to happen all over again. There's going to be mass protests, not just in the States, but probably all over the world again, right? There are people who agree with her. There's been a lot of conservatives that have responded to her and said, well, like, what's the fucking point in doing this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been a lot of conversation about it. And there's been a lot of things that have kind of happened in the trial. There was one point where the defense for George Floyd was doing like fucking brilliantly. Then there was, I think it was like a day and a half, possibly 2 days, where the defense for Chauvin was doing like kind of came out of nowhere and was doing very, very well. Yesterday, there was 3 doctors that took the stand and kind of talked about it and stuff like this. And it has genuinely been what I believe to be the most damning thing to Chauvin's defense that I've seen in a very it's to the point now where if the jury finds Chauvin innocent, like, I can kind of see where this viral TikTok person is coming from. in the sense that there's going to be mass protests again. So just to kind of like contextualize it, and just so we're not kind of going from like memory or anything else, I'm going to play this. It's 2 minutes long. We'll just play it through, and then we'll
Go for it.
come back to it.
Threats that will come out at a respiratory rate of 22.
Is that number, the respiratory rate of 22, significant to this case?
It's extremely significant.
Why is that?
Because one of the things in this case is the question of fentanyl. And if fentanyl is having an effect and is causing depression of the respiratory centers, the centers that control breathing, that's going to result in a decrease in the respiratory rate. And it's shown that with fentanyl, you expect a 40% reduction in the respiratory rate. So with fentanyl, his respiratory rate should be down at around 10. Instead of that, it's right in the middle of normal at 22.
So you didn't see a depressed rate of respiration or breathing rate in Mr. Floyd?
No, it's normal.
And so what does it tell you, bottom line, with respect to fentanyl as relates to Mr. Floyd?
Exactly. In terms of fentanyl, one of the major changes you see in fentanyl is a slowing of the respiratory rate. So, and again, we would be expecting a 40% reduction in the respiratory rate with fentanyl. The normal respiratory rate is 17 breaths per minute, plus or minus 5. So that would mean a normal respiratory rate of between 12 and 22. That's the normal range of respiratory rate. And so if it was with fentanyl, you'd be expecting a respiratory rate of 10. Instead of that, you count it here yourself. And you can see when you count it yourself that the respiratory rate is 22. So basically it tells you there isn't fentanyl on board. That is affecting his respiratory centers. It's not having an effect on his respiratory centers.
So Mr. Floyd.
So yeah, that's kind of what I mean. Like that's pretty fucking damning.
Well, I mean, it's expert medical opinion. It's expert medical opinion. I'm not qualified to question it. I mean, if he tells me that I knew that there was fentanyl in his system, and if this man tells us that the fentanyl in his system, while obviously he shouldn't have had it in his body, did not contribute to a reduced respiratory rate significantly, because the story that was spun in the wake of George Floyd's death was that yes, the knee didn't help, but the fentanyl didn't help either, and so it was a combination of poor police subjugation and drugs that killed the man in question. But what this doctor has just come forward, I presume it's a coroner actually, has come forward and said is that actually the fentanyl didn't do that much damage to his respiratory rate, and therefore it was all the knee. And if it's all the knee, then I wouldn't suggest that maybe Mr. Chauvin is guilty of murder, but he's definitely guilty of manslaughter, because through his actions, a man has died unnecessarily. So I don't know. Obviously, the subtleties of Minnesotan law are beyond me. I don't know what his crime is, but he has definitely committed a crime, it would seem. I don't think there's much cause to argue the point. I mean, losing his job is the least of his punishment. There should be something other than that. And if he walks out of the courtroom, the problem, the thing I don't like is that and I'm going to upset a lot of your viewers here, I don't really support BLM for a number of political reasons, because I don't quite trust their motives, but that's a different conversation. I don't like the idea of people taking to social media ahead of the verdict to say, if you don't give us the verdict that we want, we will burn the city down. That's not helpful. You can make arguments about, well, the justice system is corrupt, and we can't, because I'm sorry, but you are contributing to its corruption. If you genuinely believe,
the agonizing video showing George.
Oh, if you genuinely believe,
sorry. Oh shit! Yeah, that was still going to be playing. Sorry, I should remove that. Sorry.
If you genuinely believe that your words on social media will influence the outcome of this trial, then you don't actually believe in the justice system at all, and therefore you're part of the corruption that you seek to rail against. So yeah, I'm not happy with it. I haven't seen the TikTok in question, but I'm not happy that such things are going out. That's not what you do. What she should have done is release that video in the wake of the verdict. If she'd done it that way around, I would have had more respect for her. But simply saying to the camera, "Give us what we want, or we'll burn stuff," that's not mature or constructive.
Right. Okay. So, like, I do kind like. Oh, okay. Yeah. Like, well, I'm sorry, but I do kind of agree with what she said. And the whole kind of message with what she had said, because I mean, like, what message does that send? If you don't convict this person who killed George Floyd, because if you don't convict him, then I mean the message that it sends, very much like the results of the Breonna Taylor case, it tells us that U.S. police can just kill you, and if you die, well, it's just
yes. But bear in mind, it's not enough. Let's look at what we've just done. In the wake of a woman on TikTok posting a video suggesting that if I don't get what I want, I'll spit my dummy out. We've watched a video of a man giving medical testimony, having presumably, I don't even know who this man is. He's presumably performed the autopsy on Mr. Floyd, or was part of the team that did it. Because I know several teams came through. It wasn't just one autopsy. I think a couple of coroners' teams had a look. And he's given his opinion. If the verdict comes back that Mr. Chauvin is innocent or not guilty of the crime that they want him to be convicted for, it's not enough to simply say they ignored this medical testimony. There must be some kind of legal justification for it. So this is why, because you know what's going to happen, Stephen. If Mr. Chauvin isn't convicted, if he walks out of the courtroom because he's not necessarily innocent or it's unproven or something like that, if he walks out of the courtroom, they'll start setting the city on fire before they've even learnt why the verdict was given. If they don't like the reason behind the verdict, I could at least understand the violence. But that's not enough. You can't simply say, if I don't get what I want, I'm going to burn the city down. You have to understand why the verdict came back against you and then respond. But that's not what's going to happen in this case.
Yeah, I mean, so this is the guy that was talking. He's Dr. Martin Tobin. He is he's Irish American. Good for him.
I must admit, I did hear an accent. I thought, what was that doing in there?
Yeah, he's a critical care physician. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. And academic who recognize the expert in acute respiratory. Oh, all right, okay, that's kind of going into the thing there. So yeah, that's just who he is. That would kind of lead me to believe that he's like, he didn't do an autopsy on him, but like it is just in his kind of medical.
I don't have the right to question his credentials at all, and I'm not suggesting that he's a stooge employed by people who want to see Mr. Chauvin sent to prison. What I am suggesting is that the sequence of events is: woman appears on TikTok and says, "Give us what we want, or we burn the city down." Clip goes viral of respiratory experts saying the fentanyl didn't contribute to Mr. Floyd's death. If then Mr. Chauvin walks out of the courtroom, or the sentence is light or whatever, the BLM protesters will go mad, but they won't understand why they've gone mad. They won't understand why the verdict was handed down. Because here's something else, Stephen. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on YouTube, actually. Have you seen they've released the body cam footage from the police officers? Have you seen that's been leaked? It's on CNN were playing it, but the uncut footage is available on YouTube. And I watched it today. It's about half an hour of it, half an hour of body cam footage. And they're certainly rough, but when I watched them behave, there was no suggestion that they held Mr. Floyd in any particular contempt. Does that make sense? They didn't hold him they weren't abusing him verbally. They weren't abusing him physically that I could see. They were manhandling him, certainly. But there was no suggestion that they were doing it because of his color. That never came across. And obviously, you see the knee event from a different angle, and it's again, one clip of one doctor isn't enough to justify the burning of cities. I'm sorry, it's just not. At least not for me.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So that's something that you've kind of said a few times, and I do have to give a good bit of pushback on that. So, what's the stat? Like 94% of BLM protests have been entirely peaceful. There's only been 6% of them that have turned not peaceful, that have turned into riots, and all of the evidence that we have of the cause of the start of the riots that have happened because of BLM protests have not been started from BLM members. They were either there to counter protest. They were undercover police in plain clothes that are trying to, cause up trouble or cause a scene. There is. I'm not going to say no because I don't like making those kind of absolutist claims, but if there is any evidence to suggest the riots, that the burning down of buildings, that the like throwing of Molotov cocktails, what's the other things that like people throw out, that all of those things, if the evidence to suggest that it was started by BLM members is sketchy at best. So if not just non-existent.
It's not just BLM. There's also, because they're allies with Antifa as well, and Antifa are, as far as I am concerned, a far left extremist, even, well, I don't want to say terrorist organization, well, because they haven't been officially labeled as such, but they employ terrorist tactics. I don't like Antifa much either. But again, there is a connection between Antifa and violence, certainly. BLM, I disagree with them on political grounds because they're Marxists, and I'm not a Marxist, and that's pretty much it. So yeah, I don't particularly care for it's the implied threat in the TikTok video that you've mentioned. The idea, if you don't convict Mr. Chauvin, cities are going to burn again. And she clearly doesn't say that with any kind of trepidation. She's clearly saying that she's implying that this is going to happen and you deserve it because you did not give the verdict that we want. And look, I'm not saying that Mr. Chauvin's going to walk free, and I'm not even going to suggest that he deserves to walk free, because what do I know? Haven't been following the trial because, frankly, I haven't got the time. But it's the idea, it's bullying. That's what it is. It's bullying. If you're saying to people, give us what we want, or we will commit violence, or violence will be committed by people we're associated with, or we will allow the violence to happen and won't move to stop it, that's effectively a bully boy tactic. That's not how civilized people behave, regardless of political affiliation.
The BLM, movement as a whole, but also the organization of BLM. So those two are completely separate, right? So there is the organization that is BLM. That's the the kind of body of BLM that is made up of members who have titles, just for example, right? And then there is the people who are part of the movement BLM, who just agree with what BLM are doing. So technically speaking, I would be part of the BLM movement because I agree with what they're doing. I'm just not part of the organization. But both the movement and the organization have denounced the violence that have happened, as a cause of the riots that have happened at their protests. So they're not incentivizing violence. They're not incentivizing that it escalate to the point where riots happen and where violence ensues. But more to your Antifa point, Antifa hasn't killed anybody ever.
I never said they did.
No, but what I'm saying is it's this idea that because they're being called a terrorist group by Trump during one of the debates, and the fact that this idea of them being labeled as a terrorist group is kind of even being kind of floated, to me is just a little bit I just don't really kind of get it, because yes, they are a political organization, right? And they are they're in fact, you know, they're like trying to get things done or to get things accomplished, right? Or to stop something else, you know, to stop the rise of fascism. But the idea that they are being labeled as violent or being, you know, tossed around for this label of a terrorist organization when they literally have never killed anybody, that to me is a little bit like, you know, it's very, very common to see people criticize Vosh. I've even kind of done it myself a little bit, you know, about the fact that like he's like far too frequent with the title of you know, calling people Nazis, and that by doing that the like word or the severity of Nazis start, you know, it lessens a little bit because it's not as severe. Because as you've just kind of said, you know, if anybody who is like right of Marx, or if they're a Nazi, I mean, like that it's too broad and you can't kind of like, you know, you can't pinpoint it anymore. It's the same sort of thing here for me. If you're being, you know, if you're labeling BLM or if you're labeling Antifa as violent or as terrorist organizations, when Antifa hasn't killed anybody and the riots that have happened at BLM protests weren't started by them, that's very strange to me.
You don't need to commit murder to commit terrorism. You just need to commit terror. You need to create terror. That's the whole point. We've seen more than enough footage of people throwing rocks through windows and turning over cars and things. I'm sure there are people who infiltrate groups. They do send undercover cops into fringe political movements on the far left and on the far right to monitor them from within in case they're planning something that is truly antisocial and destructive. But the idea that all the violence comes from infiltrators or from bad actors and that there is nothing to connect it, because we know that if you are joining an organization called Antifa that is prepared to go into the street covering their faces, armed with rocks, etc., there's going to be some people among them that are going to do violent things in the name of the cause with capital C. You know that it's true, and it's not just Antifa. It's true on the far right as well. You'll get fellow travelers who think that, you know, Mr. Hitler was a civil rights leader and all that rubbish, but then you'll get people who will actually do something about it. They'll try to realize his vision. So if it's true of the far right, it's true of the far left. Now, that doesn't mean that every single person who signs up with Antifa is guilty of something. I'm not suggesting that they should be, because again, one of the reasons why the terrorist label was never truly applied to Antifa is because there wasn't enough evidence to suggest that they were a threat to civilization. You know, they weren't like, I don't know, maybe do I want to use the IRA? No, let's not do that. But you know what I mean? They weren't, you know what I mean? They weren't committing enough violence on a grander scale to be deemed as a threat to the body politic. So that's why it never flew. And I respect that, I do. But the idea that again, I don't like it's kind of like I don't like apologists for extremism. I'm just too moderate, too soft. Like they claim to be anti-fascist. Well, that's a good thing, aren't we all? I mean, fascism doesn't work. It was debunked in the 20th century. But the trouble is that they label everything as fascistic. So this is why you can't trust extremists like that, because they're not reasonable, they're not grounded, and they're not willing to listen. And they don't want to be told that they're wrong. They don't want to be told that what they're doing is wrong. They don't want to be told that what they're doing isn't going to solve the problem, or that they've mislabeled the problem, or they've misdiagnosed the problem. They don't want to be told these things. And that's why I don't have any time for Antifa. BLM is slightly different, because I don't believe in as I've said in a previous video, I don't believe in the oppressor-oppressed matrix. I don't believe in that neo-Marxist paradigm. And I know that BLM is a Marxist organization because I looked at their about section on their website and read what effectively was Marxist tropes. In fact, one of the few times that I've agreed with PragerU. Have you heard of a chap called Will Witt? Do you know PragerU? I mean, no. I assume you know PragerU. Well, one of the comments. Yeah, but
I'm an online lefty. Of course, I know PragerU.
No, but there's a chap on there called Will Witt who pointed out that BLM changed their about section on their website from what I read to something far more banal, to try and cover up the fact that they're actually a Marxist organization, because they got a lot of criticism in the press, obviously the right-wing press, for being Marxist. And I actually went and checked their website and went, yes, they have changed it, because that's not. I remember telling a friend of mine in England that I didn't support BLM because they were Marxists. And he came back to me and said, you told me to look at their about section, and what you told me wasn't there. And I went, oh, well, now I look like a liar. Thanks for that, chaps. And I went back and I found they had changed it. So they are concealing their ideological roots, which annoys me immensely. I don't mind. They can be Marxists. Just tell me. Just be open with it. But no. And so I can't side with them at all.
Yeah, well, see, this is like one of the differences that I was kind of talking about. It's the difference between BLM, the organization, and BLM, the movement. So the organization is the one that has the website, that had the, you know, neo-Marxist, you know, stuff on it, right? Or that like came under fire in the press and stuff like that, right? That's who was under fire. There was the organization BLM, but the movement BLM incorporates people from like all different walks of life, all different political affiliations. They're very few and far between, but I'm sure that there are at least some like right-leaning people who agree with BLM. Or who would, you know, call themselves supporters of BLM because, you know, they see the treatment that of exactly what they're talking about. Like, you know, they see the treatment that Black people are getting by the police, and, you know, they like don't like this and they think that it's wrong, etc., etc., etc. And, you know, so they're like going to go out and they're going to protest with people who are or who are other supporters of BLM. Obviously, I can't really do that now because, well, A, I'm in Ireland, and you know, B, there's COVID and stuff like that. So, but in a COVID-free world, if I was in the States, would I march with BLM? Absolutely, I would. Yeah.
Yeah, this is where we have to be careful, though, because by supporting the movement, you are supporting the organization by extension. Ian in the chat has pointed out, has asked a question, didn't one of the US leaders say they were trained Marxists? And yes, she did. There's a young Black woman was taking the stage in a college somewhere and said that they were trained Marxists. So supporting the notion of BLM, the idea that Black people should not be mistreated because of their color, is perfectly fair and noble. And yes, you're right. People of all political persuasions are not the far right, but they're scumbags. Nobody cares about them. But most people would agree with that sentiment, that BLM is a noble statement. But unfortunately, by marching in the street under the black fist, you are supporting the organization. When you give money to the movement, you are giving money to the organization. And obviously that money has disappeared. God knows where that's gone. But they've raised...
Well, it's gone largely to Democrats. It's gone largely to Democrats, yeah.
But exactly. I mean, they've only been around for 8 years. They've generated over $1 billion in revenue. And the Black communities that they claim to protect have not received a benefit from it. They haven't set up trust funds or anything, college funds or anything. This is the problem. So, yeah, not being racist to Black people is a perfectly reasonable and civilized cause. I'm not here to argue that point at all. And I'm not but the idea that I must march under the black fist, I mean, I'm not saying you've put this idea forward, so no, but the idea that I must march under the black fist to prove that I disapprove of racism is I can't live with that, because what it does is it means that the organization becomes unaccountable in some way. It means that as long as they say BLM, 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 and they are tied to the movement of fair, righteous people, then no, you can't have it both ways. I should be able to say on national television, for example, I agree that racism is wrong, but I don't support BLM because. Yet if you try and do that on social media, if you don't put a black square on your Instagram profile, if you don't put the fist in the profile picture, if you don't put hashtag BLM or the longer form in your, people assume that there's something wrong with you, or they assume that you are part of the far right. And this goes back to the political polarization that we've been talking about multiple times. I mean, look, march if you want to. I'm not saying you shouldn't, because obviously I know your heart's in the right place and you want the brutality to end. I'm not patronizing you there. I believe that of you. But That doesn't mean that I have to support the organization, even if I object to its, despite the fact that I object to its ideological underpinnings. I can't. I just won't.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I'm not saying, and I don't really think that anybody else is saying that you have to support BLM. I just think that, like, yeah, no, I don't know, man. I just think that, I don't know, I just don't like. Okay, there was something that you said there, which was, if you support the movement, then you're like either directly or indirectly supporting the organization as well. And I just don't really kind of
But the organization
that follows, because to kind of draw like a little bit more of like an abstract. In the 2020 election, would I have supported Biden over Trump? Well, yeah, I would have. But does that mean that I support the Democrats? No, it does not. So,
no, but you are in that scenario. You are supporting a Democratic candidate, so ultimately the party benefits from your support. I mean, BLM, the movement. So, I appreciate the distinction between the movement and the organization. I do, because obviously the organization is a fixed body with a list of employees, etc. But because the movement is born of the organization, if you march under the Black Fist, you are at least promoting the organization that represented by the fist. So you, even if you don't mean to, even if you just think Black Lives Matter, which is a perfectly fair and just and noble sentiment, by saying Black Lives Matter, especially with capital B, capital L, capital M, by putting the Black Fist anywhere on your profile picture or on Facebook or whatever, by doing that, you are promoting the organization that gave birth to those forms. I'll give you another example. Let's make it less political. If you said, I don't know, hashtag Coca-Cola, and you put the Coca-Cola label somewhere on your profile picture, you might not be touching the product, you might not be buying the product, but you are promoting the organization or the company that produced those images. It's the same thing, I would argue. So the idea, if you want to march in the street against racism, that's absolutely fine. And it's been done multiple times. Case in point, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, take your pick. But the idea that I have to march under the BLM logo, or that there's a difference between the movement and the organization, well, yeah, there is, but there is a link. And that's the problem. There is a link. And because of that link, I can't endorse BLM, the organization, and I can't march under the Black Fist, because as I am not a Marxist, I don't want to march under what is ostensibly a Marxist symbol painted black. I'm not doing it. I could decry police brutality. I can suggest that Mr. Floyd should be walking around, but that's not to say that I marching under the flag means nothing. It's a testament. A testament, if you like. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I just personally just kind of think. Like, even if I was to kind of, okay, so if you say, if you're part of the movement, then you're supporting the organization, and yes, that is true to a degree, but that doesn't mean that, like, you can't have issues with the things that the organization is saying. Right. So if somebody is, you're run of the mill liberal, or you're centrist or whatever, right, and they, openly kind of said that, that, like, we're a Marxist organization, right, just to kind of keep it like to, exactly kind of what they had said, or whatever. That doesn't mean that a liberal or a centrist, like, can't say, okay, well, hang on. I agree with what BLM is saying and what they're doing, and in their fight for justice, but I don't agree with what what the kind of larger organization is saying. I disagree with this specific point, but I agree with the larger image, and it's sort of in the same as, like, yes, I would have supported Biden over Trump, but that doesn't mean that I agree with everything Biden says. Of course I don't. I'm a fucking socialist, and I've called him I've called him a diet Republican before, which, policy for policy, he would be. But kind of getting away from the point is that simply because I would have supported Biden doesn't mean that I agree with everything that he says, and simply because somebody supports BLM doesn't mean that they agree with everything that BLM says.
Okay, but by supporting BLM or by supporting Biden, you are supporting everything that he says, because when he gets into office, he'll be able to enact policies that you disagree with. It's the same thing with BLM. If you support, no, but think about it logically. If obviously Biden's better, if you think Biden is better than Trump, which is fine, that's a perfectly reasonable position. If by supporting him for the 1 or 2 things you like and holding your nose with regard to the 8 things you dislike, when he gets into office, he will be able to act on those 8 things. So you are, in fact, supporting things that you disagree with. Now, I recognize that distinction. I don't believe that you're a closet Bidenite or anything like that. But the same is also true for BLM. I can disagree with, racist abuse without supporting an organization because also the other thing that winds me up about all of this is that this organization, this BLM organization that's only been around for 8 years, has completely dominated the news media. Where's the NAACP? Where are their interviews? There must be other groups. Why is this the one that gets all the media coverage? I mean, there must be diversity of thought within Black America, as there is with any sort of pink population. So why is it that BLM is the only one that gets the press coverage? Why is that image the only one that is used, the one with the black fist? Why is it that if I don't use the black fist, I will be castigated? I'll be cast out like a leper, Are you undressing, Stephen? Is that what you're doing?
Oh, shoot. No, I'm not undressing, but I desperately have to pee, so that's what I'm going to do.
Well, right, hello, chat. I hope that you're still there.
I can still chat. I can still talk.
Okay, fair enough. No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, sorry.
I'll just multitask there for a little while.
Fair enough.
What was I going to say? Yeah, you see, okay, so this is where I got and I realize that this has gotten somewhat off topic because we're now talking about more so stricter kind of politics things, rather than just kind of the nuance of the BLM movement. I do have to say though, I cannot kind of overstate how much issues I take with the idea that simply because you support a political candidate that you either must or inherently or indirectly support everything that they do or say. I just take massive issue with that. I mean, we've talked before about the fact that how much of a Bernie bro I was, or how much I loved Bernie during the primaries. I still don't agree with everything that Bernie has said. You know what I mean?
No,
there was the kind of bigger kind of news story at the time where Bernie came out and he said that he is in favor of giving prisoners the vote, that people could vote from prison. I literally have a fence post embedded in my ass because I've been sitting on that fence for so long. I constantly go back and forth on that issue. The point is though, if to kind of take your logic or what you're saying here, I would have to support everything, or even indirectly support everything that Biden or that Bernie does, which is just not true.
No. But by support does not mean endorse. But what you're doing is by giving your vote to a candidate. And look, I'll say this. Let's put it in a British context. I voted for Boris Johnson and the Boris Johnson's Conservative Party in December 2019. I don't agree with every conservative principle or policy that the party puts out in its manifesto, but I recognise that by voting for the party, I am supporting that manifesto in toto. I can't simply say, well, I voted for Boris Johnson and that's how, but half of the manifesto I disagree with, so I take no responsibility with that for that. That to me doesn't make enough sense. I recognize that my vote contributes to their success, and to that extent alone, I am supporting their success and therefore supporting whatever they stand for. So yeah, I respect that you don't endorse things that BLM do or things that Bernie promised. I respect that, I do, and I'm not trying to split hairs, but support and endorse don't necessarily mean the same thing. So when if I were to support I can support the notion that Black Lives Matter quite easily because they do. They matter as much or as little as other coloured lives do, right? They just do. But the organisation BLM is walking around with a black fist, and when I see capital B, capital L, capital M, that means that I am not just spouting what I know to be philosophically true. I am supporting an organisation that put that statement in the media at the expense of other groups who are not represented in the media. As I say, the NAACP, one of the oldest civil rights organizations in the United States, gets barely a whisper because they're not as dramatic as BLM, so they don't get interesting, column inches. But the NAACP put out a statement within 24 hours of Mr. Floyd's death that was very sober and considered. They said, this sort of thing would very easily go away if there was more accountability and cops were brought to justice. It was a very sober tweet. It was about, a couple of sentences, but that's not very exciting. It's not BLM. BLM are dramatic, okay, maybe they're not burning down the Capitol or whatever, but they're certainly out in the street demonstrating with placards and banners and things and slogans. And, they've got the hashtag thing going on. They're much better at social media than the NAACP are. And so I resent the idea. Well, I don't not resent you. That's not fair. But I resent the idea that I must say BLM. I may say that statement in full, and then maintain that there's no connection between my statement and the organisation that spawned it, because I don't think that's true. It's not that it's fair. It's not unfair. I just don't think that it's true. That's where I take issue. You can oppose racism and you can oppose racist abuse without endorsing the trend of the moment. One must be able to. And that's my position on it. The organization is more complicated than just saving black people from police brutality. And it's those complications that trouble me. And the movement that you support, that you would march for, is merely one facet of a greater project that I have no interest in. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. I just kind of, yeah. I think we just have a fundamental disagreement. Randolph Richardson is in the chat. How you doing, man?
Hello, Mr. Richardson. Don't think I've seen you in the chat before, but Stephen.
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah. You see, I just think that we just have a fundamental disagreement on, and I don't. Okay, so I don't necessarily think that you believe or that you're accusing me of, I must agree with everything that BLM says, or to kind of go back to the other example, that I must agree with everything that Biden does and says simply because I would have supported him over Trump. I just find that idea very problematic. I find it like the first step into entering a cult, because if you must agree with everything that they say and you cannot disagree, and if you try to disagree, somebody will says, well, you supported him and you voted him. Yes, that would be true, but that doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything that they say. I can't tell you how many people that I have met online over the last couple of years, and I recognize this is purely anecdotal, so you can't just toss it aside, but the amount of people who had their political awakening under Obama, when he campaigned as the next fucking FDR, who was going to do absolutely everything, and yet he then governed as a centrist, and he started and escalated all of these wars in the Middle East. And the idea that they had maybe not voted for them because they might not have been 18 at the time, but would have largely supported him and would have put out Facebook messages or even done YouTube videos, etc., 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 giving their support for him. The idea that simply because you would have supported a candidate that I have to agree or can't criticize something that they do simply because I would have voted for him if I was in a position to do so. I just find just very, very strange to me.
No, but that's not what I'm saying. Taking the Obama example, I'm not suggesting, because the disappointment, because I'm just old enough. I mean, let's face it, I'm 10 years older than you, Stephen, which is actually quite scary. I've said that before. I'm old enough to remember Obama mania in 2008. I remember that, and I remember how mad it was. The disappointment with the Obama administration is that he didn't act on his campaign promises as he said he would. So if his campaign promises were, half terrible, then that's where it would apply. So that's a slightly different issue. The fact that President Obama was not, Hawaiian Jesus, as people like to market him as. What I'm saying though is that it's not about whether you agree. Your agreement is not necessary. What I'm saying is that when you vote for a candidate, you must accept that if you don't agree with some of his principles, that your vote supports the overall campaign that puts the candidate in office, that allows them to do things or to enact policy, some of which you won't like. That's all I'm saying. It's got nothing to do with agreement. I mean, as I say, you disagree with Bernie Sanders. Well, I disagree with much of what Bernie Sanders says, but for obvious reasons. But you disagree with some of what Bernie Sanders. That's fine. You don't have to agree with everything he says. And I'm certainly, and as you've pointed out, it would be a cult. If you said everything that Bernie says is amazing, I'd question your mental health, to be honest, because you need to be able to doubt your own leaders as much as anybody else's. But the trouble that is that you can't simply say, well, I voted for the man, but then when he does something wrong, your vote contributed to his success and put him in the position where he could do wrong. That's just how that works. And it's not a question of whether you agree with it or not. So, for example, if Boris Johnson, my British Prime Minister, does something that I disagree with, I can voice my disagreement, but my vote in December 2019 still supported him, still put him in a position where he could do the thing that I disagree with. That's all. It's not a value judgment. I don't have to take blame because Boris Johnson did something I disagree with, but I'm simply saying that my vote contributed to his electoral success, which it wouldn't. Well, actually, it didn't, because in my neighbour, it's a Labour stronghold. But my area is a Labour stronghold. But do you see my point? It's not about whether you agree with what the man says. It's about you put your cross in a box and put a man in office, knowing that there were some policies you disagree with, but you held your nose and ignored those. But so if someone then comes up to me and says, you supported Boris Johnson, I would have to say, yeah, I supported Boris Johnson, even though I disagreed with policy X. That doesn't mean that I am responsible for policy X, but Boris Johnson's still responsible for policy X. But my vote supported him. That's it. That's just my position on it. So I'm, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of just extrapolate that exact thing and then just apply it to BLM, though. You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of like the overall point here, I guess, right? That's the kind of that's kind of what we're talking about. That you can be opposed to police brutality. You can, be shocked and horrified at what happened to George Floyd, as with all of the other very, very high profile cases that they're kind of like, you can support those and still kind of take issue with what the overall movement says, in the same way as you can vote for somebody and yet take issue with one thing that they're going to do. That doesn't mean that you're casting doubt over everything. It just means that you're criticizing this one thing. That's all.
Yes, but it's the fact that the movement and the organization bear the same name. That's my ultimate problem with it, because the organization and the movement bear the same name. And the organization spawned the movement. I am not convinced that the movement is separate from the organization. I'm just not. Maybe they are, and I don't know enough, and I would accept my ignorance on that point. But saying that you disapprove of something, I don't need to march under the black fist. I don't need to march under the black fist to be opposed to racism. So I don't need to put hashtag BLM on Twitter. I don't need to make my Instagram picture black. I don't need to put some sort of like black fist in my profile picture. I don't need to do that. I don't need to join the movement. And there is something else that another reason why I take this stance. I have a few black followers on TikTok. And some of them, in fact, I've got quite a few black followers on TikTok, but some of them have sent me private messages saying, I only put hashtag BLM. I only put the black fist. I only make that because that is what is expected of me. I live in a black community where everyone else is doing it. And if I didn't, I would be shunned. I would be cast out. And this is deadly. I'm deadly serious. They've sent me messages saying that they've done this. They're playing along, and I think that's silly. The idea that, I mean, surely, particularly people in those communities, surely they must be able to say, I think police brutality is wrong, and not have to go through the rigmarole, the social expectation of putting the black fist in their profile picture or putting hashtag BLM. They must be allowed to do that. Why must this movement dominate the discussion? I don't see a reason for it. If you want to join the movement, if you agree with either with the organization, have at it. I'm all for political diversity, as you well know. But the idea that you can join the movement, but the movement is tied to the organization and that they bear the same name means that they're not truly separate in my mind. They're not truly separate. So if you discover that BLM is part of a larger project to refit Western cultures, which it is, because it's an anti-capitalist movement as much as an anti-racist movement, then I don't have to adopt any of the symbols. I don't have to adopt any of the slogans. And nobody else does either. Because then at that point, what you're doing is you're keeping the movement alive or the organization alive, despite the fact that you don't actually agree with most of what it stands for. And I just don't think that's healthy. I think there should be diversity of thought, even on an issue as important as this.
Yeah, so I just did a pretty quick Google there. So there was an estimated 15 to 26 million people in 2020 who participated in protests in the US in support of BLM. There's nowhere near 15 to 26 million people who are in the organization.
No, but this is
which we would both agree with, right? But the point is, and why I'm bringing this up, is it would be foolish for either one of us to say that all 15 to 26 million people who participated in the protests are all in agreement on everything, or who would all kind of, think the same way about everything. So I get they're under the same name and stuff like that, but the people who are protesting in solidarity with BLM are not going to agree with everything that the organization BLM says or does.
Agreed.
I can somewhat sympathize in the sense that, yes, that it can be a little bit confusing because they are under the same name. But it's just
but this is the question. Why do you think they have the same name? It's because they are linked. Now, I agree, 15 to 25. How many people did you say? 29 million?
15 to 26.
Yeah, 15 to 26 million people who joined the movement. They're marching in the street, but what they're doing is they're like grassroots support. They're keeping the BLM name in the press. That's what they're doing. Now, that's not what they mean to do. They probably haven't even visited the blooming website. A lot of them will do it because they objected to Mr. Floyd's death, and that's fine. That's a perfect, as I say, objecting to Mr. Floyd's death is, as we both agree, is perfectly reasonable and sound. But by acting as they're acting like pluggers, they're acting like marketing for the organization without necessarily knowing anything about the organization or what it stands for or what its ultimate goal is. Now, that doesn't mean that they've all read the website, they're all agreed, they're not all card-carrying anti-capitalist, mad lefties. That's not what I'm saying at all. But by marching under the black fist, by marching under the name BLM, by putting the hashtags and everything else on their social media profiles, they are keeping the organization alive in the minds of the audience. That is their ultimate, that is what, even if that's not what they mean to do, that is what they are inevitably doing. Because it's a marketing campaign. You know this because you probably do social media more than I do, says the guy with the TikTok channel. But you understand how this works. Viral marketing is brilliant. Viral marketing is free, and the audience participates in the promotion of the product. That's how that's why they do hashtag trends. That's why they have short internet clips for adverts. So yes, okay, the 26 million people. Let's say, to be honest, let's be extremely generous. None of them have been on the BLM website. None of them agree with anything that the BLM organization says. But by marching under the fist and the name, they are keeping the organization alive in the minds of the audience. And some people will go to the website because of their participation in the street walks. So that's why I can't march under the fist, because I know that I am doing my little bit to keep that alive, to keep that organization alive in the minds of the audience. And I don't want it to be. I don't think that this organization should, or the movement, or that slogan should dominate the discussion, because it's more than what it says. There's more to it underneath it. There are ideological substrata that are not immediately apparent until you start scraping away. And I can't, for that reason, endorse that slogan, because it's not just 3 words. It's more than that. There's an entire ideology there that I want no part of. Underneath it all, buried deep, which most people might not be aware of, but they are keeping it out there. That's all.
Yeah, Yeah, I don't.
Thoughts,
It's a tricky one for me. Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of think that we could kind of go round and round on
we're not going
on the merry-go-round on this for a very, very, very long time. But just kind of in the interest of kind of, saving that time, shall we say. The reason kind of why we initially kind of brought up BLM, George Floyd, and the Derek Chauvin case was because arguably the most detestable right-wing person online, at least on YouTube, and the most popular one. Wait, let's just see now if I can. There we go.
Ooh.
Sorry, we're in the fucking Matrix right now. Did that.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah. Yeah, well, then Stephen Crowder is a man-child. I'm not a big fan of Mr. Crowder. He squawks like a high school jock. He like a lot of American commentators, apologies to Americans watching, but like a lot of American commentators on the left and on the right, they confuse volume with substance. And he's Mr. Crowder is far too loud for his own good. I don't know what this video is meant to, because the thing that, because I watched this bit and because it's on YouTube, you can find it yourself. But I watched it and I thought, what does this actually prove? Do you know that does the man in the uniform know that he's positioned the neck as Mr. Chauvin did, positioned his knee as Mr. Chauvin did? Is Mr. Crowder lying as George Floyd was lying? Has he taken fentanyl? And all the rest of it. This is not a controlled experiment. This is pure theater. It doesn't add to anything.
Yeah, I don't agree with everything that Hassan has to say. I don't like his delivery of his content. Look, that's very kind of quick and easy for me to say. I mean, Hassan is fabulously wealthy. Like, he makes probably 100 times what like Vosh or any other of like my kind of preferred online people make. Like, no joke, literally 100 times what he makes. He's ridiculously wealthy. But that tweet was kind of perfect.
What does it say?
Oh shit! He said Stephen Crowder not attempting the actual knee on the neck pressure that killed George Floyd is everything that you need to know about how horrific and violent that process actually was.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the thing. It is if you look at the way it's presented, if you watch the original film clip, and I don't suggest we do really, but it's not. No. It's staged. It's not. There's no aggression, there's no brutality, there's nothing. What he's trying to do is he's trying to undermine the very event that's under trial. And of course, if the verdict comes back and it says that Mr. Chauvin is guilty of killing Mr. Floyd unnecessarily, then the follow-up video from Mr. Crowder would be, well, this is just, the justice system kowtowing to the woke mob. And so he's setting up a narrative that will pay off. He's setting up a narrative that will pay off in some capacity. But yeah, I've watched. I mean, I encourage people in the chat to go and watch it. It's not intelligent or considered in any way, shape, or form what he's doing. And it's just, and as a piece of theatre, it's just vulgar. So yeah, we agree on something. There you go. That's not bad.
Yeah, there's this image over here that's kind of like a little bit. I, for some reason, can't get it because if I go on to that, it just brings me to the website that I was just on, which doesn't actually show the image, which is very fucking annoying. But yeah, no, it won't. Oh shit, Jesus Christ! I'm sharing the entire screen though, aren't I? Yeah. So if I just download that, then I should be able to. Where the fuck is download?
Save image as.
Save image as. There we go. And of course, that would pop over there. Although, if I move this over, is that going to make it? Has that popped up on your end?
I can see it, certainly.
Now
it's Spanish head.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so you can kind of see that, like, where Chauvin's knee is nowhere near where whoever the fuck this guy's knee is. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, that's
what he's doing. Yeah, he's resting it on Stephen Crowder's shoulders. You could see from the
whereas so Chauvin's knee is in the middle of his shoulder and his head, otherwise known as his neck. But you can't you know what I mean? Like, there's a clear line between where his back is and where his head, like that. His neck is kind of, or his knee is kind of digging in there, but that's just not present here at all. It's nowhere near present.
The neck forms a natural valley between shoulder and skull. In the original footage, but you could see for the position is because the thing is that, I mean, Joe Rogan, who's obviously not a acclaimed medical source, pointed out that obviously as someone who does Brazilian jiu-jitsu, he knows something about moves and holds and pressure points. He pointed out they tell you not to do pressure points around the neck because you can actually kill people by cutting off blood to their brains. And that's why when the original footage of it, he was the first to come out and say that is not a move to subdue somebody, because you can do permanent, even if you don't kill them, you can give them permanent brain damage. So, but as I say, I think I hate to disappoint you, Stephen, but we agree on this. Mr. Crowder,
I know.
Mr. Crowder has done something very, very silly. But again, I don't think it's because he's a right winger and right wingers are silly. Because I think it's because Mr. Crowder is silly. And he's just, I don't like the man. I find him immature.
I just can't. I can't properly put into words how much I just detest Stephen Crowder. He's just a despicable human being. I absolutely loathe the idea that we share a first name.
His name is spelled differently, so there's that. But I don't hate Stephen Crowder. I hate what he says, but I don't hate him personally, because I don't think he is emotionally mature enough to understand just how stupid he looks when he does things like this. If put it this way, if Stephen Crowder,
he should be though.
No, but he isn't. If he's naturally immature, if he's a man-child, then he wouldn't know. But imagine if Stephen Crowder was 13 or 14 years old and he did something like this with his mates, you'd kind of forgive him because you go, oh, he's just a teenage boy. The point is that Stephen Crowder is a teenage boy. He acts like one, even though he's got the body of a bloke. And so, but a full-grown adult man. So I don't hate him because I know he doesn't know any better, even though he should know better. I know that he doesn't, so I can't hate him. I just don't watch him. I don't endorse his channel at all.
But I just Googled it though, and he's 33.
Yeah,
Like
Stephen, I know guys.
He's 33.
I know guys my age who are still living in the same bedrooms they had when they were like 10 or 11. So I can believe anything is possible, right? Some people never grow up. They might grow up physically. They might even move out of the house, but emotionally they never mature. And I suspect that Mr. Crowder is one of them.
Well, look, I mean, the whole kind of like not moving out thing, I mean, like in the world that we live in, that's just
no, I appreciate that.
Economically, that's just the economically smart thing to do. But oh God, I don't know. And we had talked earlier in the stream as well about how much I love comedy and how Stephen is just fucking terrible at it. Have you seen any of his stand-up routines? I mean, like actual stand-up routines now from like way back before he had Louder Crowd. Oh God, it's terrible. It's terrible.
Do I want to? No. But the thing is, he squawks. He squawks a lot, and he overreacts. His so Randolph Richardson's come back with, "Oh my, what would those people do without you to keep them in line?" I don't keep them in line. It's not my job to tell them how to behave. But I know people who reached the age of 14 and stopped emotionally, and they never left. They never left their family homes. They do tend to go hand in hand. But Stephen Crowder, I don't especially admire him. His emotions are unsophisticated as well. He either giggles insanely, or he screams at the top of his lungs, or he rages as well. There's no nuance with him. There's no emotional ambivalence. And he does stupid stunts like this where he imitates George Floyd, and he's like, "No, I'm sorry, I don't buy it at all."
Yeah, no, look, I mean, okay. I don't like, okay. This is kind of, I kind of have to work backwards, and even though this should be obvious to absolutely everybody, this is the internet, and we have to make it perfectly clear.
Yes,
irony
has no place here.
Yes, I don't want Stephen Crowder to have perfectly mimicked this, because obviously it would have turned out very badly for him. But just the act itself is just terrible. I'm sorry, it's just fucking terrible.
It's a bit like when was it when Logan Paul went into the suicide forest in Japan and filmed a corpse?
Yeah, and it's
on that level of it's completely callous. It's completely ignorant. It is immature, and it's not normal. It shouldn't be endorsed, and that's why I think Logan Paul got absolutely destroyed for doing it. But this is the sort of thing where, and again, Mr. Crowder knows at least that he's going to get negative press attention, but what he doesn't understand is that he deserves the negative press attention because he's being a clown. That's the problem. He knows that when lefties like you or people on Vox or HuffPo or something say, "Oh, Stephen Crowder did a bad thing," he's going to assume that he's actually done a right thing because you disagree with it. What he doesn't understand is that there are right-wingers who disagree with it. And the reason we disagree with it is because this is tasteless crap. It doesn't add anything to the conversation. You know what? It would have been refreshing if he had tried this, filmed it, and then suffered not suffered actual death, but experienced loss of breath or something like that, and gone, "Wow, maybe there is some truth to it." That would be revelatory, and maybe he'd grow up a little bit. But no, that's not what's happening here. Or he knows that his colleague is putting his knee on his shoulder, and therefore he's not illustrating the point. But fire upon thee, poo to you with knobs on.
I tried to kind of find the video, but I couldn't, somewhat annoyingly. But there was one of the other doctors that was on yesterday that kind of described exactly kind of how exactly it happened, which is when he was kneeling on his neck, like it took away like a certain amount, it took away a certain percentage of his breathing ability, and therefore it literally became harder and harder and harder for him to like get a gasp of air, a breath of air, which then made it which then made it more painful when he did try and gasp for air. And so like essentially what he was saying, and this is not even like taking what he said and kind of, you know, putting my own spin on it. He basically said this himself. He essentially tortured him because the method in which he used to suffocate George Floyd, it was slower and it was more painful. So I mean, yeah, like a slow, painful death. I mean, if we're not going to classify that as an example of torture, then I don't know what your standard is, but it's just, and just to everybody else, to Randolph and to everybody else who was in the live chat and who was going to watch this afterwards, for anybody to kind of say like, oh, you know, obviously everybody is in agreement on this. Yes, whereas we might have different opinions about BLM, about, you know, the George Floyd thing, about everything else, that this was just uniquely bad and everybody disagrees. Unfortunately, not everybody agrees. We had a question of the day yesterday in the iDebates Discord server that I'm a mod in. And there was people who basically saw nothing wrong with what Stephen Crowder did there. And it's and look, this is not me as like taking an advantage or an opportunity to kind of shit over conservatives, because I fully know and I fully understand this is not the vast majority of people who would take that side, who would see nothing wrong with
this. This is not a conservative action. This does not reflect conservative principle or policy. This is an immature pseudo comedian trying to make light of a serious event which will have national repercussions regardless of what the verdict of the trial is, and he's not doing a bloody very good job of reenacting the event. He might as well not have bothered. But what he's done is he said that he's replicating the death, and he's not, because his colleague, his friend in the police uniform, isn't doing what Mr. Chauvin did. And for that reason alone, this entire stunt is pointless. But if he then goes around saying, well, I had the knee on my neck and it didn't kill me, it's like, yeah, but we can see that you didn't. We can see that the knee is on your shoulder blades. It is not applying pressure to the jugular vein. And therefore, you are not experiencing anything like what Mr. Floyd suffered. So it's, as I say, this is not about politics. This isn't like left versus right, socialist versus conservative, progressive versus Republican. That's not the split. The split is, do you think that a man should be allowed to make to perform stupid stunts like this, even though it doesn't actually illustrate his point at all? And I would say no. He should have done this better. As I say, I don't want Mr. Crowder to suffer. That's not in my nature. But it would have been more interesting to see him go through the Floyd experience and actually lose consciousness or something like that, and he could wake up and go, "Oh, well, yeah, maybe there is something to it. Maybe we have got this wrong." But he didn't, and either he knew what he was doing or he didn't know what he was doing. But either way, he shouldn't have done it in the first place.
Yeah, and like, so this is not like the first like overtly kind of, you know, racist or making fun of sort of like something like that he has done. Like, I don't know exactly how long ago this was, but he did do that.
Yeah.
And
but again, that's the kind of stupid high school humor that I would expect of him. That's the thing.
Yeah,
I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, look, I'm not going to pretend that that's not a racist image, because it clearly is. But what what I draw, the only distinction I would draw, because again, we're talking about Stephen Crowder, is does this suggest sort of an anti-Chinese racist sentiment, or is he just a 14-year-old trapped in a man's body? And I'm inclined to think the latter.
You see, I'm sorry. I just think that you're being just too charitable towards him.
You see, I genuinely,
I would personally like to believe that your opinion of him is true. I would genuinely like to believe that, because it would make what he did here and in the image that I have just shown like far less heinous. I would love to agree with you, but I don't know, man. There's just too. It's I don't know. There's just too much.
The thing
too
is
much.
the thing is with the Chinese image, as we're going to call it, as I'm going to call it, the Chinese image there is that doesn't look like a Chinese person. You know, anybody who's seen pictures of modern China would know that while, yeah, that's obviously national costume for some people in some scenarios, that's like, what was it? Was it Mickey Rooney who played a Chinese character in Breakfast at Tiffany's, where he dressed up very much like that with the buck teeth and the round glasses and all the rest of it? That is a replication of a Chinese stereotype, caricature, that is decades out of date, if it was ever relevant in the first place, you know, if it was, you know. So again, I just think is it trolling? Is it baiting? Is it just adolescent claptrap? I don't know. But and I'm not suggesting, I'm not defending the image itself, because the image itself is, you know, odious. But whether it indicates an underlying white supremacist, white nationalist, anti-Chinese sentiment, I don't know. And again, I don't want to defend Mr. Crowder because I don't like him. I don't like the man's character anyway. And you know what? If we'll dredge his emails and we'll find that he subscribed to, Stormfront or something. But that fair enough. But again, I don't believe he's mature enough to know exactly what he's doing. If you approach Stephen Crowder with that image and said this is racist against Chinese people, he'd probably just scream at you, "Stop being a snowflake," and it's just a laugh, or we're doing it to bait the audience or whatever. I don't think he'd understand the resonance. I don't think he'd understand the depth of his failure. Again, if I'm wrong, fine, it's fine. But I don't like Mr. Crowder anyway. I don't think he's capable of that level of self-reflection.
Yeah, well, with that, Kendon, I think that we have talked for long enough. It's been 2.5 hours, so it's been a good old chat. We haven't agreed on that much, but at least we can end on a high note of agreement.
Crowder is a dick.
Yeah, I think that we should probably try and organize that every video that we do, if we're talking about a lot of different topics, like we pick one at the end where there's going to be some agreement, So I like that kind of feel good kumbaya moment, even though I don't really like it, but still.
Yeah, there's no blood on the walls, is there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's still a little bit of I don't know, it's like a little bit more hopeful, I guess, for the audience, to kind of see, people not agreeing on absolutely anything at all, to then kind of come together for this last point to then, agree and stuff like that. So, a little bit of hope, a little bit of maybe not everything is all that bad sort of thing, Anyway, yeah, as I said, I think I'm going to leave it there. Do you have any final words, or do you want to shill your TikTok?
Yes, if you want to hear anything more about my political opinions, you can find me on TikTok under Kendon Farr. You can see the spelling at Kendon Farr. The slogan of my channel is "Less hate, more debate." So even though I'm centre right and Stephen is clearly centre left, and we don't agree on much, I'm determined to beat I'm determined to beat the algorithm. My enemy is not the Irish socialist. My enemy is the algorithm that separates me from him. So that's what this is all about. So I'm not interested in shouting at people, and I don't agree. I don't want to agree with everything he says. I want good conversations in good faith. So Stephen, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm just I'll wave at the audience again. Hello, and I'll stop doing that now. There you go. And yeah, no, it's been fun. We ought to do this more regularly. I should have really promoted this conversation on my TikTok channel. We might have had a few more viewers. In fact, what I'll do is my next video will be a promotion of this one if it's going up instantly onto YouTube.
Cool.
Yeah, so do a bit of plugging. Why not?
Yeah. Just kind of on that note, actually, so the first conversation that we did is that is my most successful video now, officially.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen like 600
has the most views
or something. Yeah, but the thing is, one of the things I like about TikTok as a platform is that when you put a video out there, it is not actually in your interest to delete it. So somewhere out in the ether is my video promoting the first video from way back.
Yeah.
Ago. So someone is going to find it and go, "Oh, I like this guy," or I think it's, and they're going to find your video. So you're going to get repeat viewings. I also promoted the second video, and you'll notice that that's getting a few views again, but for the same thing. So the TikTok algorithm is working to plug your channel, because effectively it's just putting out the same videos over and over and over again to different audiences all over the world, and people are going to drop in eventually at some point.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's pretty good. The TikTok algorithm does help me from time to time.
Yeah, no. I mean, it like definitely does. I think I've gotten like, I don't know. I would guesstimate at between 20 and 30 subs out of it. So
that's not bad.
Helps me out, and as you had said, it's just continuing to kind of grow and grow and grow, and those numbers are just keep going up. So hopefully they stick around to the end where I say very much this, and then we will kind of transition out. So thank you to everybody for coming. Thank you to live chat. Thank you to Kendon, obviously. Thank you to Kevin's internet, who made it impossible for him to come here. I swear he does exist. I'm not just making him up. So like, sub, do all that YouTuber bollocks, and we will talk to you in the next one.